to end with this quote. It's from A Few Good Men. This is I'm quoting Jack Nicholson's character, Colonel Jessup, when he says, when he's talking to Tom Cruise about getting the truth, and he says, "I have neither the time nor the inclination to explain myself to a man who rises and sleeps under the blanket of the very freedom that I provide, and then questions the manner in which I provide it. I would rather that you just said thank you and went on your way." And that is the way I feel when I hear people, anybody basically under the age of 40, casting moral aspersions on the civil rights movement and saying what they would have done if they were in their position. We should just say thank you and go on our way.
I'll never thank anybody for pushing communism ever. So
that's your argument, and you're free to hold it. You said we were done. You said we were done.
We'll see you next time. Thank you.
Grace and peace, everybody. This is a quick jump in. I wanted to look at this video from Jason Whitlock, and it was a little bit long, so I didn't realize how long it was. But they were,
and so
Chad Jackson,
for the Heritage
he's a friend of the channel, good brother.
Welcome to.
He sat down and debated with Delano Squires today about MLK and his legacy. So I was thinking it was a little bit longer than that. So what I want to do is just tap in, do something different today. Start a little bit different today. Let me see if I can speed it up a little bit and jump in. If Candace goes live today, we might still discuss her, but if not, it's perfectly, trust me, it's perfectly okay. Anyway, let's jump in and see what Chad and Delano are talking about. Grace and peace, everybody. Let's go.
The Harmony Channel. I am Jason Whitlock, your host. Happy MLK Day to those who celebrate. It is Martin Luther King Jr. Day across America. We wanted to have a special conversation about Dr. King's legacy because it is now being questioned. Is it a force for good, force for bad? Is it necessary? And so I've invited two guys familiar to my audience, Delano Squires and Chad O. Jackson, to have a conversation with me today about MLK, his legacy, his importance to American history. Was he a force for good? Was he for a force for bad? Delano will argue the pro-MLK side. Chad, who's got his own documentary on MLK, will argue the anti-MLK side. But before we get into this debate, which I'm really looking forward to and hope that you all enjoy, I'm hoping that maybe there will be schools or young people that watch this discussion and learn from this discussion. But before, I'll let these guys introduce themselves, give you a little bit about their qualifications, why they're qualified to participate in this debate, and tell you a little bit about themselves. Delano, get us started. Introduce yourself.
Well, again, Delano Squires, been a long-time contributor to The Blaze. I have been writing on issues around race and culture for quite some time. Actually, I wrote a piece last year for The Blaze on MLK. Actually, I've written two pieces on MLK for The Blaze. And in addition to that, I write a fair amount about sort of the future of Black America. My focus typically on the family, but I do see some linkages between what has gone on in the past and what lies in front of us in the future. So I'm excited about this. I'm looking forward to this debate and looking forward to chopping it up with Chad.
Delano, you just left out. You work for the Heritage Foundation.
That is true. Sorry. I'm the director for the Center for Human Flourishing at the Heritage Foundation.
All right. Chad O. Jackson, a plumber and a historian.
Yeah. So I'm Chad Jackson, as Jason just mentioned. I am the owner of a plumbing company out of Dallas, Texas, also a documentary filmmaker. Right now we're doing a docuseries on MLK called the MLK Project. This topic is something that I've been researching for years. And in fact, the film company that I own and operate, Historia Revelata, basically seeks to go back into history and to really look at the facts of what we have on hand and to try to recontextualize it for the preservation of Western civilization, quite frankly. So I'm excited to get into this debate. I'm a huge admirer of Delano's work. He's a prolific writer on family issues. And so, yeah, I'm really ready to get into it.
Perfect. So we're going to start. There's going to be 5 different topics here. And I'm going to give each of these guys, because just quite frankly, these guys are long-winded. I'm going to try to discipline them a little bit. But on each of these topics, I'm going to give them both 4 minutes to state their opinions, establish their positions, 4 minutes uninterrupted. I don't think this will be hard for these guys. I've given them some time to think about it. And so each will take 4 minutes, and then I'll let them rebut each other for 2 minutes, uninterrupted. And then we'll just have a back and forth conversation about
that's pretty good.
One of the 5 topics we're having. And so each of these 5 topics, we'll spend about 20 minutes on each of them. And so to get us started, Delano's going to go first. And so our opening question is, was Martin Luther King Jr. and the Civil Rights Movement a force for good or a net negative for America in general and Black people in particular?
So my position is that MLK and the Civil Rights generation were a force for good, both for America and for Black people in general. I think it's important to contextualize the work that Dr. King and his associates did in the Civil Rights generation. And when I say contextualize, again, think of what life would have been like for a man in the 1960s, right? Probably the grandson, or at best, at worst, the great-grandson of people who of enslaved Black people in this particular country. And he comes along, and he's most known for the Civil Rights Act of 1964. But prior to that, between the end of the Civil War and 1964, there were, to my recollection, 5 different civil rights acts and 3 Reconstruction amendments. So there were several times throughout American history, again, post-Civil War, where the federal government said, we need to pass legislation to protect the rights of Black Americans. And clearly those things did not have the intended effect. So my position is what Dr. King did, and again, his peers in that generation, was a force for good. I think one of the arguments is that, well, look at where the Black community is now and what people do. And I would say, to be fair, I believe Chad does this at times as well, is to say, Black America is in a worse position now than it was in 1965 as it relates to several different measures. I say first and foremost being the family. And because of that, we believe that the Civil Rights Act was a mistake. How civil rights were delivered to Black Americans, the process has led to damage within Black America. And again, I reject that position. And I'll put it simply this way. If you are a Black person who wants to go to school where you want, to live where you want, to shop where you want, to marry who you want, then you owe some debt of gratitude to the generation that came before you. So, I mean, that's my general position. And I think, again, this is consistent. The idea that there should be efforts to eradicate differences in treatment based on race is consistent both with our constitutional history and, history post 1776. Really quick, I just want to read a quick few lines.
You got a minute and 19.
Okay.
Yeah.
A quick few lines from Justice Harlan. This is the dissent in Plessy versus Ferguson. He said, "In the eye of the law, there is in this country no superior, dominant ruling class of citizens. There is no caste here. Our Constitution is colorblind and neither knows nor tolerates classes among citizens. In respect of civil rights, all citizens are equal before the law. The humblest is the peer of the most powerful. The arbitrary separation of citizens on the basis of race while they are on a public highway is a badge of servitude wholly inconsistent with the civil freedom and the equality before the law established by the Constitution." This was in Plessy versus Ferguson. Brown versus Board of Ed overturned that particular decision. And again, he was the lone dissenter in Plessy. So I see King's work as a continuation of that thread from the Civil War, from the end of the Civil War through Reconstruction, that said, finally, we need laws in place that ensure that American citizens are no longer discriminated against based on race.
Delano, good opening statement.
Mhm.
And I do
Okay.
want to, before you go, I want to advise you, you can rebut what Delano says after you give your opening statement. So your opening statement doesn't have to be a direct rebuttal to what Delano said. So let me restate the question. We'll restart the clock here. Was Martin Luther King Jr. and the Civil Rights Movement a force for good or a net negative for America in general and Black people in particular?
All right, Chad, let's go.
Well, the truth of the matter is that the Civil Rights Movement and King were not a force for good.
Come on.
Really, what they were a force for federal expansion and the USSR propaganda. The USSR, the Soviet Union, literally called the Civil Rights Movement in America the strategic propaganda asset, because that's exactly what they were. When you look at King's organization, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, there was a direct line and an indirect line of communication between them and the Soviet Union. This goes back to the 1930s under the FDR administration, where you had the National Negro Congress, which was started by a commission out of the FDR administration, and Joseph Stalin himself. A. Philip Randolph was the leader of that organization. And by the time you get to the 1960s, he would hand the baton off to Martin Luther King. And so there has always been communist infiltration in the Civil Rights Movement, and it didn't change under Martin Luther King's leadership. I argue that this is a force for bad and is a detriment to Black Americans and to America at large, insofar that the communist ideology is antithetical to our way of life. It's antithetical to genuine success. I know Delano writes a lot about family values. He writes a lot about conventional methods and means to becoming successful.
Let's go.
Communism is antithetical and downright hostile to those conventional means that my parents and grandparents and great-grandparents undertook to become successful. Whether you're talking about in rural Arkansas, whether you're talking about in rural Oklahoma, where my folks are from, or in Texas, where I live now. When you look at this notion of what Marxism breeds in terms of exploiting grievances, as Thomas Sowell documents, as well as the late Walter E. Williams and other scholars, you saw this kind of upward mobility, this upward trajectory on the part of colored people from the 19th century well into the 1940s and 50s. And then as this kind of cultural Marxist rhetoric, this kind of feel sorry for me grievance rhetoric began to take off with the help of the press on the part of the civil rights activists, you saw the spirit of embitterness really enter colored culture, what we now call Black culture. And that has had an adverse effect on, again, not only Black culture, but also the larger American society. And I'll end by saying this: when you look at the late Nikki Giovanni, who was a poet, a radical Marxist feminist, she said in an interview with James Baldwin that Black folks in America, she acknowledged this, Black folks in America have always been successful and have always had businesses. People can look this up on YouTube right now. She said that However, my generation, we were not good business people. We were good civil rights people. We decided to become activists. And when you look at the fact that from around that time to today, you see this kind of widening of the disparities, gaps, and so on and so forth. And you see this kind of embracing this bitterness and the spirit of entitlement that we now have. And you look at what King was saying in the 1960s, along with people like James Baldwin and others, they were really instilling the spirit of bitterness. And this was part of the kind of Soviet propaganda program that they were implementing. And so, no, it was a complete detriment to the larger American society.
We're good.
Give it to
Delano,
Right.
we'll restart the clock in 2 minutes. Delano, go ahead with your rebuttal.
So I find it interesting when you asked Chad whether MLK was a force for good. One of his first moves was to talk about the civil rights sort of era with respect to federal expansion. And I'm not surprised because I've consumed a fair amount of Chad's work. Not all of it. I mean, so Chad is a prolific documentarian, and I give him credit for that. But at times it seems as if Chad seems to believe that government becomes more moral the closer it gets to the people. So for him,
Sorry.
and again, Chad, you will correct me if I'm wrong. What I'm hearing is the federal expansion, federal overreach from his perspective is really the main sin here. And I would counter that by asking pointedly whether Chad believes that, let's say in 1965, 64, 55, that separate spaces, right? Basically, should Black folks have been continued to be subjected to separate public accommodations, separate entrances, whether it's water fountains, restaurants, restrictive housing covenants, anti-miscegenation laws. Chad, is your perspective that those things should have stayed in place until such time when the populace within a particular state said, we are ready to no longer discriminate against our Black citizens in the ways that we have been doing? Is that your position?
I'll articulate my position in a more elaborate way when I get a chance. I don't know if I can answer that in a simple yes or no, but with a gun to my head, I would say yes, because that's in keeping with what Booker T. Washington laid out, and that was actually yielding the fruit that it was desired to yield.
So we can come back to that in the back and forth aspect of this.
Okay.
Delano, if you got 20,
shouldn't have did that.
30 more seconds, if you had anything else you wanted to rebut, or we can...
No, we can go to Chad.
It looks like he just wants to move right into the
No. We're
Back and forth, right.
which is fine.
Reclaim your time.
Restart the clock 2 minutes, and you can rebut what you heard from Delano.
So one of the things that Delano brought up in his opening statements, which was he brought up what life was like. And with all due respect, this is one of the things that the left often does, which is they really kind of lean into the art of storytelling and imagine yourself as a Black man in the 1930s or what have you, so as to really kind of push this notion or this narrative that the conditions were such that there needed to be drastic, radical change. But the thing about it is, when you look at the rhetoric of revolution that a lot of the civil rights activists and the other social justice activists were really pushing in those days, this idea of revolution, a lot of it was the exacerbation, the exaggeration, the exploitation of grievances. This is part of the kind of Marxist framework. We try to find a grievance, we exploit it to the hills, and we try to get people riled up enough to where they then will take to the streets. It will cause unrest. It will cause this kind of destabilization phase. And out of that destabilization, people will cry out for the federal government to come in and do something about it. When you read Risa Galyabuff's book, she's a professor out of Virginia Law School.
Look at what happened in Minnesota yesterday.
She wrote a book called The Lost Promise of Civil Rights, and she's not ideologically on my side. She's a leftist, but she even makes the point that the civil rights division of the Justice Department was built for the purpose of government expansion, which goes back to the question that you had about, is it my view that the closer you get to the people, the more moral the government is? In a sense, yes. because the fact of the matter is we are a country made up of diverse people with diverse backgrounds and diverse beliefs. And this is why I would side more with the anti-federalists, Patrick Henry, Robert Yates, Luther Martin, and others that believe that to the extent that you try to have this big, overarching, strong federal power that's centralized, you're going to have the kind of resentment, the kind of unrest, and all the things that breed from that because we are so diverse. So you need to have it kind of condensed down as much as you possibly can to make it closer to the people.
At this point, it's on you all. You go back and forth. You got questions you want to ask or whatever, do it now. We can go 10, 15 minutes, knock yourself out.
So where Chad started there was, I almost fell out of my, Chad said that I was engaging in the art of storytelling. I would wager Chad has at least 100 hours of storytelling as it relates to MLK and the civil rights movement.
Okay.
And one of the things, and I've said this publicly so I can say it here, is that when I consume Chad's work, I noticed the use oftentimes of adjectives where I think verbs should be. One of the favorites is nefarious, right? So instead of saying this person said this or this person did that, what Chad would say is, oh, this particular act, the law was passed under nefarious circumstances. That's the art of storytelling. Chad, in his opener, talked about how Black people lived in the South, and I've heard him talk about there was more harmony between Blacks and whites in the South than people want to give credit to. And that might be the case in some places, in some locales. But the notion that storytelling is sort of the exclusive province of the left is something that that's, come on now, we can't say that. So that was one small point. But again, I would ask Chad, do you think that a Black man who wanted to shop in a particular retailer and was told you cannot shop here because you are a Black man had a legitimate grievance, let's say in the year 1955?
No.
Okay.
Because we have freedom of association.
Okay.
And if a white store owner don't want you shopping in their store, I believe it's their right to not allow you to shop in their store. And on the contrary, I believe if you're a Black man who owns a store and don't want white people coming in, that's perfectly right. It doesn't make it right, but it is your freedom of association. And so I believe that matters such as that should be handled in the marketplace. I don't believe that we should cede to the government the right to force people to serve those whom they don't want to serve or hire whom they don't want to hire for, or not be able to fire people for certain reasons that they find to be fitting. And so yes, this idea that it is a legitimate grievance that a Black man who was denied the transaction of buying a sandwich should now go to the government and have the government come down and put a gun to the person's head to serve me. I don't believe in that level of coercion by any stretch of the imagination. I do, however, believe in desegregation. In other words, I don't believe that there should be laws on the books where the state is forcing segregation. And so to that extent, I do believe that those laws should be done away with. And and those laws were being done away with. I mean, whether you're talking about, from the turn of the 20th century into the middle part of the 20th century, you did see some of these laws being repealed. And giving credit where credit is due. The NAACP were taking some of these cases to court and they were having victories in the courts. But then a lot of it too was through people coming together on the ground level, having nothing to do with the government at all. These were what we call interracial commissions, where responsible Negro and white leaders were working out their differences, working out their issues without it ever getting to the courts or getting to the legislature or what have you. And so this is what we call the reformative process. With the reformative process, you have a character building component in it because it takes hard work. But once you achieve whatever it is you seek to achieve through that reformative process, it is sustainable insofar that it requires character in order to be maintained. However, when you have the revolutionary process, it's quick, sudden uprising that exploits grievances, that sows discord, that creates agitation in the streets, such to where, again, people cry out for federal legislation and quick, fast, and in a hurry right now, to the extent that the new social norm is predicated not on character, but rather law and law alone. That is going to, I mean, first of all, it's artificial, but then two, that new norm that you have will self-implode. It's only a matter of time. And when you look at the Nick Fuentes type, and I know I'm jumping ahead, but when you look at the Nick Fuentes types and you look at this kind of contingent that are now rising up as the pendulum swings from the civil rights industry, that's not sustainable. It doesn't, anyway, I've been rambling. Go ahead.
So I want to ask two questions to sort of bracket what I understand to be your governing philosophies in two periods of time. You talked, excuse me, you used the word revolution. You talked about how, sort of revolutionary change is not sustainable. Would you apply that to the American founding as well?
Well, that's actually a tough question, because the difference is you did have a foreign entity that was governing us from afar.
Okay.
And here you've already had a long established culture that has existed for a long period of time. And I would say that it's different than the kind of subversive kind of agitation that we saw with communist revolution.
I mean, there was certainly agitation. There was certainly violence in the streets. There were a list of grievances. Correct.
Yeah, there were grievances, but again, the way that communism disseminates through deceptive, subversive means is altogether different than what Thomas Jefferson, for example, was doing in terms of really laying out and airing out the grievances. And of course, if you're talking about like the Boston Tea Party, if you're talking about things like that, where they dressed up in Indian garb and things like that, and they were kind of moving deceptively, point taken, point very well taken. But I tend to see I tend to see what we were doing during the so-called Revolutionary War and the spread of communism as two completely different things.
But I think part of that is because you are reaching a conclusion, and that's fair for you, because you'll say, look, I've done the historical research and I reached this conclusion. But I think you're reaching a conclusion where an argument should be, because your entire characterization of the civil rights era is basically this was communist and therefore it was negative, right? So it's either, and I mean, we're human beings, so sometimes you can have tension within your principles. But when I hear you say, revolutions are not sustainable forms of social change, agitation, violence in the street, and then you say, well, the American founding, sure, we had our own culture. The government who was ruling us was far away. I mean, Black folk will say, look, we had our own culture for hundreds of years. The people who are ruling over us may be near, but we have similar grievances, right? We don't have representation. I was watching a video with you last night, actually, and it sounded like you were making an argument against enfranchising free Black males post-Civil War. And you correct me if that argument was wrong, if I'm mischaracterizing it. So it seems as if there's some tension in your principles, and I'm just trying to understand that. The War for Independence, the American founding, was one point. The second point, and again, this is more contemporary, would you then, just given what you said about the ability of private enterprises to serve whom they want, to hire whom they want, would you then be in favor of, let's say, what conservatives characterize as DEI policies, where companies say, we're going to favor Black, Hispanic, LGBT, women, whatever, non-white males in hiring and promotion over white males? Would you be in favor of that? And do you think federal or state law that prohibits that, would you characterize those as federal overreaches?
Real quick, everybody, shout out to everybody who just jumped in. It looks like about 150 have tapped into the best live chat on the internet. We are watching Chad O. Jackson in the tie and Delano Squires. They're debating the legacy of MLK Jr. Fantastic conversation. And I just wanted to show you just how wonderful it is for two gentlemen to disagree on something that's pretty contentious. And nobody's cussing, nobody's fighting, nobody's throwing anything of that nature. It's just a good quality debate, good quality sharing of minds. So I just wanted y'all to see that. It's on the Blaze Network. I'll also leave the link to it down in the chat. Everybody, thank you so much. Let's go.
Or government overreaches.
I'm going to try to reframe your question to understand it better.
Okay.
So are you asking, is it okay for a private organization, entity, school, company to have DEI policies? Is that what you're asking?
No, I want to put a finer point on it. When I say DEI, because people mean different things when they string those three letters together. I'm talking specifically, if Coca-Cola in 1954 said we're not hiring Negroes, if we have Negroes, they bring the sodas into the restaurant and then they go on about their business. It sounds as if your position would be Coca-Cola has a right to do that. If Coca-Cola in 2026 says we're not hiring any more white dudes, to the extent that we have white dudes in this company, they will no longer get promotions. And when we have internal meetings, the people of color go in one room and the white people go in another room. I'm asking, would you be okay with that?
Constitutionally speaking, it's their right. Coca-Cola has a right to do what Coca-Cola wants to do. I might not like it. My neighbor might not like it, but I have nothing to do with Coca-Cola. I didn't put in the blood, sweat, and tears to build Coca-Cola. Therefore, what my opinion is, whether as a voter or just as a man on the streets, should have no bearing over, on what they do. So, I mean, I don't know about the legalities over, the difference between publicly traded companies versus private, like legitimately private companies.
Right.
But even to the extent that there is a difference, I do believe that in many ways, a lot of what is done in this country is a complete betrayal, if you will, of our genuine constitutional principles. And so, speaking in terms of constitutional intent and the freedom of association, I don't believe. I do believe that Coca-Cola should have a right to run their business how they wish to run their business, and the decision as to whether they will stay in business or how well they'll do as a business should be left to the free market.
So then, let's say the conservative activists, and I'm asking these questions because again, I'm making parallels, and also I'm trying to true up the scales because I want to understand sort of the principles that undergird your argument. So conservative activists who say this is anti-white discrimination and this should be eliminated using the force of law, you would say would you characterize those people as agitators in the same way you would, sort of 1960s or civil rights protesters or?
Yeah, I mean, I do that all the time.
Okay.
And this is why, again, I don't really have a political home. I'm neither a Republican or a Democrat because I believe in the true intent and the true edicts of the Constitution. If up to me, we would even go back before the Constitution to the Confederation of States, quite frankly. But I don't believe in this kind of, I don't like this thing happening in society. Let us run to the government and have them do something about it. I don't like that because to the extent that you do that, it becomes this ever expanding thing. And again, you can't do that when you have a country so large as ours, so diverse as ours. I mean, Texas is not the same as Tennessee, it's not the same as Georgia, it's not the same as New York. We are so, and even within states, you have different towns and different cities and different counties. You have rural areas and metropolitan areas. We're so different. And so to have this kind of, I don't like this, let us now take it to the courts, let us now take it to the feds and have them do something about it. We seek safety and security in big government, and that's the part that I don't like. And so whether it's Republicans doing it or whether it's Democrats doing it, I don't like it either way. But what I am saying though is that when you look at the civil rights movement, when you look at a lot of the social justice movements over the course of the 20th century, they were doing it better than anyone, insofar that their kind of brain trust, the puppeteers, if you will, who are pulling the strings. These are people who have, and I made this point on Jason's show, these are people who studied the soft sciences, who studied the social sciences, who studied human behavior and group behavior, and they're using it to their advantage. I mean, when you look at, for example, in the USSR and how they were developing these ideas and developing these means of population control and controlling of public opinion, so on and so forth, where you look at the fact that they wanted to imperialize their ideology throughout the world through the domino effect, and wanted to do so in a way that doesn't really require having to pick up a gun against a nation. They did it through implosion. They did it through infiltration and subversion, and they were having success all over the world. The problem in the United States is that you had, by and large, a kind of church-going people, especially in the South. Negroes were heavily church-going, as you well know.
Mm-hmm.
And so this created a kind of captive audience. In the 1930s, of course, you had the Communist Party resolve to infiltrate the church. And so whether you're talking about Earl Browder's outstretched hand, whether you're talking about the work of Bella Dodd, of course, she would do it through the teachers' unions, but she writes about how the communists were infiltrating Protestant and Catholic seminaries and churches in order to blur the lines between Christianity and communism.
Mm.
And we know as Christians that we are not to participate in darkness, but we're to expose darkness. And so nobody did this better than Martin Luther King in terms of blurring the lines. And I don't know if we're going to get into this later in the debate, but the fact of the matter is, with the help of the press and with the kind of instructions of his handlers, King was able to, in a sense, he was able to, what's the word I want to use here? He was able to kind of collectivize the people through charisma and through his kind of charm and through his oratory and through his speeches, which sounded like one thing, but if you go back and listen to those speeches and you know what you're listening to, you're going to hear something completely different. And what this did is it kind of knocked us off our square, as it were, and it caused particularly the young Black radicals who were deviating from the kind of trajectory laid forth for them by their parents and grandparents. What it did was it kind of caused a lot of people to adopt this mentality that the way to be successful is through agitative means, is through revolution. And as a result of this, you saw this kind of downward trajectory.
Go ahead. Last one, and we got to move on.
It's interesting because on one hand, you will point to government overreach as the problem, right? But then on the other hand, you'd say, well, no, it's sort of collective action. And my thing is, prior to 1964, if King and other leaders...
Real quick, I'm going to shout in. I really like, well, Chad is a friend of the channel. Chad has been on the channel before. We've done projects before. We've talked on the phone. I mess with Chad. I have no problem with Delano either. I think Delano is a good gentleman. I've never met him, never talked to him, but I digress. I think this argument should be brought to, Chad kind of addressed it and brought it into it, talking about the church. I really think that's where this argument needs to go into and discuss the relationship between the church and the civil rights movement, because that's really where all the wheels on the bus have fallen off. That's ultimately, in my opinion, the biggest blight of the civil rights movement has been what has happened to the church. So let's finish this up. But shout out to everybody who's jumped in. Make sure you hit that like button. Let's go.
Are saying, look, there's certain things where there's unequal treatment based on race, and we want to mobilize people to change these things, right? And you would say this is on account of their handlers. I will stipulate I'm not the historian that you are, Chad, right? I do think it's interesting though, because I feel at times you use Marxism the way the left uses racism, which is to say around every corner and underneath every sheet.
Oh no.
But that's that would be my characterization. But that's fine, right? We could disagree on that.
I want to jump in there. Hold on, I want to jump in here, and I want to do this rarely though. But Marxism is antithetical to Christianity, and I do believe it's an evil, and it's a tool of Satan. And I do believe Satan is in control of the world. And so I don't think it's a conspiracy theory to think, oh, Marxism and that ideology is around every corner, because that's Satan. And so it's like when I'm listening to this debate, and again, I'm hearing Chad on a completely different level. I've had conversations, had you on, but Delano's forcing you to go a cut deeper. And it's like, this man, and I'm not, but I'm just telling you my real reaction, and I'm sorry for jumping in here, but it's like, this man is sitting over it. Nope, God is my sole provider, period, end of story. and we've been hoodwinked by MLK and all this other stuff. Like, nope, the government is an equal or superior provider for you in this life than God. And it's like, this discussion and what you're bringing out of chat, very fascinating to me. But I will say, like, when I hear people like Marxism, the devil, Satan, things trying to move you away from God being your sole provider, it is around every corner. That's not a conspiracy theory, in my view.
Well, I would obviously I would make the argument that, and let me not use the word racism because it's so loaded, but I would argue that partiality, I'll use a biblical term, based on ethnicity is also a sin.
Biblical.
Now we can debate which one is a greater sin. What I would certainly argue is that in this country, Marxism is the enemy at the door and racism is the monster under the bed. What? We're not Cuba. We haven't had Fidel Castro for 40 plus years. So the idea that, oh no,
hold on, I just want to follow you through here. You said racism is under the bed. You mean partiality is what you love?
Correct. Ethnic partiality is inside the house already. It's not something that has to be fought off from the outside, right? So I just I wanted. I don't understand. Well, let me finish the point that I was going to make, which is I get your point about government overreach, but a charismatic leader galvanizing people who want to follow him, because you can only be a leader if you have people following you, to change hearts and minds. How is that also evil? Because that's how social movements work. Whether that's the fight against abortion, or whether that'll be a fight to reestablish traditional marriage. It's always somebody leading something with the intention of changing hearts and minds. So I don't understand if it's not tied directly to government overreach, why what King and his cohorts were doing you would see as necessarily negative and detrimental.
Well, I'll try to answer the question as briefly as I possibly can, because Jason wants to move on. But what I recommend people do, and I think I mentioned this on Jason's show before, so pardon me if I'm being redundant here, but what I recommend people do is go and read a book by Walter Lippmann, written in 1922, called Public Opinion. And in it, he lays out exactly what King would later do when it comes to galvanizing the public, because that's the thing, in a democracy or in a constitutional republic, the way that you have social change is through social movements, right? It's not like a monarchy or a dictatorship where a king or dictator are able to move unilaterally. You have to have the kind of the illusion of choice, right? And to the extent that people show up to the polls and they pull the lever for this politician or that politician or this proposition or that proposition, oftentimes they're going into that voting booth with information that has been packed into their heads, either organically or artificially. And so understanding the social engineers, those who really kind of dedicate their lives to the studying of the soft sciences and who commit their lives to academia, or even going a more nefarious route to change and to move society in the way they wish it to go, they are heavily involved in social activism and creating kind of unrest and all the things. And so what Walter Lippmann writes about, he says that if a leader wishes to push a policy of campaign, the way to do it is for an orator to appeal to the masses, either through pinching a grievance, by appealing to their patriotic sensibilities or their religious sensibilities. And to the extent that an orator is able to do that well, the masses will move in towards him and demand a policy of campaign. And that policy of campaign doesn't always have to coincide with the rhetoric that they used in the inception. It can be completely detached from it. Such is the case when it comes to Martin Luther King. When you look at the I Have a Dream speech, for example, and he's talking about, I have a dream that one day, my 4 little children will be judged not by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. It seems like what he's offering is a meritocratic view, a meritocratic vision that everybody can get behind. Who can deny that? But the reality of it is, if you go back and you actually listen to that speech, because Delano, you and I, we've heard this speech growing up in school every year. I've heard it twice a year. once during, in the weekend going into the Martin Luther King Day, but then two you'd hear in February during Black History Month.
Mm-hmm.
And even though we've heard the speech, we've never actually heard the speech, right? He's saying that that if America thinks that the Negro will go back to business as usual after the summer of 1963, where we saw a number of riots, then you're in for a rude awakening. He says that the whirlwinds of revolt will continue to rock this nation until the Negro gets his due justice. So he's using this very threatening language, and he's kind of talking out of both sides of his mouth. And he says that the Negro will never be free until justice rolls down like waters. He's using all this language, and he's using this kind of open-ended fallacy. And he says, one day we'll be free at last, and God Almighty will be free at last, right? So he delivers this speech. It becomes an instant classic. And right before he dies, he gives what's called the mountaintop speech. And he's talking about the promised land. Again, this coincides with the I Have a Dream speech.
Mm-hmm.
And he says, one day we'll get there. I may not get there with you, but we as a people will get to the promised land. The promised land that he's referring to is socialism, is Marxism.
You're saying that based on what?
I'm saying that based on his own papers, his own writings. I mean, he wrote to Coretta Scott
Yes.
while they were in college that he envisioned a day where there will be a nationalization of industry. And he's writing about all these different things that are quintessentially Marxist. Now, he says that he isn't a Marxist, but you have to understand that he was going to school at the time.
I'm gonna put a pause on it.
Yes.
I'm gonna put, because you're talking next, and we're moving to a different topic that leads right into what you're talking about.
Okay.
And so the question is,
long-winded.
was MLK Jr. a socialist, a Marxist, or just a critic of the ills of capitalism?
He was an avowed, well, not avowed.
For a minute.
Let me not say that. He was a sneaky Marxist. Let me just say it that way. People have to understand, if you are looking for Martin Luther King to say in writing or out of his own mouth, I am a communist, you'll be hard pressed to find that. And so it seems to me, Delano, with all due respect, that that's exactly what you're looking for. And I say that because I've seen some of the things that you have, some of the things that you wrote for The Blaze.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen some of your tweets, and it seems like that's what you're looking for. You're looking for King saying out of his mouth, I'm a Marxist or I'm a communist. But the reality of it is we were dealing with a Cold War. We were dealing with a war of ideas where the American people, by and large, were antithetical to communism. You can't just come out and say you're a communist and think that you're going to have any kind of success. And so what they did, King in particular, he went to a school called Crozer Theological Seminary, which was overrun by communist professors. And what's interesting is that by the time
Was
King...
that here in Tennessee?
Yes. Well, no, that was in Pennsylvania. Crozer Theological Seminary was in Pennsylvania. He would later go to a communist training school in Tennessee called Highlander Folk School.
Yeah.
But King, he went to the school. It was overrun by these professors who were teaching the social gospel, which is a counterfeit gospel. That is to say, it's not the gospel at all. That was popularized by Walter Rauschenbusch in the late 1900s. What's interesting about this is it was a strategic move to get into the churches and to teach congregants something that's not the gospel at all, but something that uses Christianese, uses language that sounds very Christian in nature, but what it's preaching and teaching is something completely different. It's teaching, in essence, that God didn't come to save sinners, but rather that God came to save society from capitalism and from exploitation and all the things. So that's essentially what it is. You'll notice that every time King preached a sermon, he wasn't actually calling people to repentance. He was talking about, he was talking about basically the tenets of the social gospel. So he would learn about not only the social gospel, but also the Hegelian dialectic. In a sense, King was taught to basically mask his communist sensibilities behind the social gospel. And he would say things like, this is the gospel that I will preach to the world, referring to the nationalization of industry, radical redistribution of wealth, a guaranteed annual income, which was all kind of part of this I want to say Hegelian, but I guess what I mean to say is this Fabian kind of incremental march through the institutions. That's what King envisioned, and that's what he set out to implement. And he would implement it with success. He partnered with Bayard Rustin, who was a active member of the Communist Party who worked with the Young Communist League. It seems like I'm going fast because I'm trying to cram all this into whatever time I have left.
We'll have plenty after.
But he worked with also Stanley Levison, who was a financier for the Communist Party. These were his handlers. These are the ones, Stanley Levison in particular, would give King directives like, hey, go to Ghana to celebrate the independence of Kwame Nkrumah, who's a new leader of the dictator of Ghana. He would send him to various churches throughout the country, really pushing and teaching this message, trying to galvanize people, trying to collectivize people for the movement, which most folks were completely unaware that it was in fact a communist plot.
Chad, will pause here. Delano, I will remind you on this part, just want you to answer the question, not directly rebut Chad or use Chad as the rebuttal. Was MLK Jr. a socialist, a Marxist, or just a critic of the ills of capitalism?
At the very least, he was the last one, which is a critic of the ills of capitalism. And again, just for context, in King's day in the South, the median occupation for a Black woman was a domestic. In 1959, the Black poverty rate, this is according to the US Census Bureau, was about 40%, right? So yes, was there a growing and burgeoning Black middle class? Absolutely. There've been, Black dentists and doctors and debutantes and people on Martha's Vineyard for a long time. That wasn't sort of the overall condition of Black America, certainly not in parts of the South. But for me, it's important. If you're going to ask me about someone's ideology, right? One, I think we should define terms. So really quick, when I think, and I won't go through sort of the long dictionary definition of Marxism, I'll just give a couple of markers or things that typically characterize a Marxist. Class struggle, classless societies, abolition of family, rejection of religion, revolution of the elites, revolution of the working class, obviously the proletariat against the elites, the bourgeoisie. So socialists, again, these slight variants, same family, but socialists oftentimes concerned about inequality, large social safety net and spending, and services for public benefit. The idea that someone who's critical of capitalism in the 1960s, right, who's concerned about income inequality and who advocates for a universal basic income, the idea that those things in and of themselves make you a communist or Marxist is one that I think is hard for anyone to sustain. Milton Friedman, the noted libertarian economist, was in favor of UBI. Now, he also wanted to shrink much of the welfare state, but he was in favor of UBI. Tucker Carlson, I remember this distinctly. This was several years ago, one of his opening monologues at the top of the new year, when Tucker Carlson talked about some of the issues that face inner city majority Black neighborhoods, also face sort of rural majority white neighborhoods. And he criticized the type of crony capitalism that people like Mitt Romney advocated for. So you can find people, and then, I mean, conservative media is rife with politicians, pundits who will talk about how the elites sort of, jam up the working class, jam up the everyday man. So you'll hear, particularly nowadays, it's young couples can't afford to buy a home. The cost of healthcare, of childcare, of everything is going up. And this is part of the reason why you have this sort of populist sentiment on the right. But I think what ends up happening is Chad will say, no, these few things that I find that King did, right? His critiques of capitalism and so on and so forth. Though that's the evidence I use to charge and convict him of Marxism. And I just reject that. Not because of King, not because I'm a King defender, but because I have certain principles. And one of those is when you bring a charge against a man, you need evidence. Evidence is not speculation, it's not hearsay. Evidence is not, oh, this is what I believe. No. Do I expect King to say that he's a Marxist? No, I do not. But when he writes specifically of the incompatibility between Christianity and communism, And Chad's response is, well, of course he would say that, he's a Marxist. Then at a certain point, when like this is a circular argument, right? What I find interesting is that Chad will believe King when he writes in his own words, and we'll get to this later, when he denies the sort of bodily resurrection of Christ. And when King writes about his theological views, Chad believes him. But when he writes about his economic views, specifically against communism, then he says, of course, that's what a lying communist would do.
Well,
2 minutes to rebut.
okay. So here's the thing, Delano. You can't take it. It seems like this is what you're doing. You're taking completely out of the equation the way the communists actually work. And I challenge you genuinely. I'm not saying this to win an argument. I'm not saying this to do a gotcha. I'm genuinely challenging you and everybody watching this right now to actually go and look at communist subversion and how it was actually being carried out over the course of the 20th century. Because the thing is, in order to make sense of a lot of things that I'm saying, because I'm actually listening to myself right now, in order to make sense of the things that I'm saying, you actually have to understand how this kind of monster operates. They don't do it like they move through clandestine and covert means. They would commonly and routinely have their functionaries and their fellow travelers publicly denounce communism. This would happen on the regular because they were more effective, especially in a place like America, where most people were by and large anti-communist. They would routinely have their people say or denounce communism. When you look at the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, which was started by Stanley Levison, who was a communist. In fact, Ben Kamen, who wrote the book Dangerous Friendship, where he documents the relationship between King and Stanley Levison. And by the way, Kamen is not on my side ideologically as well. He's a full-fledged devotee of what he calls social justice. And he's an admirer of King and an admirer of Stanley Levison. He writes that Levison never left the communism as an ideology. He left the party in 1957 when he connected with King, and King knew about his communism. He left the party, but he never left the ideology. He remained a communist till the day that he died. And so like the standards that you lay out as far as what would qualify him as a communist, I get where you're coming from, but I would challenge you to look at how communism, the subversive means by which it spread, and you'll see that King was doing exactly that.
Again, I think you are making a conclusion where an argument needs to be. At a certain point, you have to have evidence, and the evidence can't be, well, he's lying, therefore that proves that he's a communist. That just doesn't hold to me. Again, I'm not saying that King or anybody else in the civil rights movement had to say, I am a communist. That would be silly. You and I, because we would agree on that. But I'm looking for the markers. Now, if you said, hey, Dr. King advocated for sort of a classless, stateless society, if he advocated for the abolition of religion or the abolition of the family, then I could say, okay, now we're on to something. I've never heard you say those things. What I do hear you do is engage in guilt by association. And again, my question is this a principle that you carry across the board? I'm an equal weights and measures kind of guy, because it is easy to say, well, this person advised this other person, and because of that, the person being advised, therefore, automatically adopts the entire ideology of the advisor. I don't know if that's an argument that can be sustained as you carry that through time. So again, I've seen and heard you do this often. Right? It'll be, no, King won't say he's a communist. He says, in fact, that Christianity and communism are incompatible. Your response would be, well, he plagiarized that speech. My response would be, okay, strange tactic for a person who believes something and really wants to see something happen, to publicly say, no, I don't believe in this thing, and these are the reasons why. And this is why I go back to answering the original question, whether I think King was a Marxist, socialist, or a critic of capitalism. Certainly he was a critic of capitalism. Everybody is. Democrats, Republicans, I mean, they just criticize it in different ways. But if the bar is that any critique or criticism of capitalism makes you a Marxist, then what I'm saying is you're going to sweep in far more people than you realize.
I apologize again, but I think he's arguing more than he would criticize capitalism. He's saying that he's part of his argument is guilt by association. You run with communists, avowed communists. I'll apologize for using my stupid analogies again, but it's like, man, I used to run around. I had friends that were pimps.
Mhm.
And when I ran around with them, you could make some assumptions about me that would be actually true.
Is one of them that you were a pimp?
If someone made that assumption, I would deny it, but I go, I see why you're making that assumption.
Of course you would deny it. That's what pimps do. You see where this goes?
I got it. But I couldn't be offended by it because I'm running around with guys that were pimps.
I guess the only question, hold on. To add to it then, are you doing gigolo behavior though? That's the question. Not just I ride with pimps because they pick me up and drop me off at church and Bible study and go watch my grandma. Are you out there doing pimp stuff? That's the question. Are you behaving like a gigolo? Because if you're behaving like a gigolo, then you saying that you're not a gigolo doesn't have any merit. If you're not behaving like a gigolo, then we could say, all right, then maybe he's just hanging around them. But even in that, you know, corrupt communications distort good morals. So I don't know if you can get away with that, Jason, but shout out everybody who jumped in. I know you might be wondering. I wanted to bring on this debate that Chad O. Jackson, the gentleman in the tie, and Delano Squires had on the Jason Whitlock show just literally today about the history and legacy of MLK. It was really informative. Thought it gave a lot of insight about where these young men land. I'll leave the link to it down in the description as well. And people are asking, are we going to talk about Candy? If y'all want to, we'll do. Candy's going hot at 5 o'clock. We'll be back. So this debate is actually really long. So we might actually interject, add Candy, and then use this as a palate cleanse afterwards. So let's get back to it. Grace and peace, everybody. Hit that like button.
Draw all kinds of conclusions about me because of that and what I think about
behavior.
What I thought about prostitution and all that other stuff. Like Whitlock must be in support of prostitution. He runs around with pimps. And so if people looked at me and you know, I'm not Dr. King, I'm not some huge religious leader, but I do promote Christianity.
That part.
And so if I'm still running around with them same guys, and that's still who I'm talking to most often, rather than Virgil and other people, and my friends haven't changed, I wouldn't blame people. Man, Whitlock, guilt by association, I kind of believe it. My father believed in it. You need to quit running with them Negroes, but they into this and that. Everybody I know believes that. But anyway, I don't.
No, I mean, and I think you actually hit the nail on the head, but I do have a question for you, Delano.
Sure.
Obviously, this is part of one of the 5 questions that we are going to get to, but was Martin Luther King a Christian?
You want to skip down there?
No. I'm going somewhere with this. But
do I believe he was a Christian?
Yes. Was he a Christian?
The stated views on core Christian doctrine that I've seen from Dr. King, from the writing of his own hands, put him, in my perspective, outside of biblical orthodoxy. If he never repented from those views, then I would not see him as someone who was spiritually regenerate.
Okay.
So I would answer that question in the negative. If he never repented,
okay.
I don't know where he was on his last days. I don't know how his views evolved from when he was in seminary. But I actually believe what he writes.
So if by what you just said, if King wasn't a Christian, what then do you want me to do with the statement that you just put out there that King said that there's no companionship between Christianity and communism? What am I to do with that if he wasn't a Christian?
I don't think you have to be a Christian to make that argument.
So what am I to do with it then?
I mean, you could either believe it or not believe it.
No, clarify your question. I don't fully understand. What are you to do with it? What do you mean? You're saying it's incompatible.
Right. So he said earlier that that King said Christianity is incompatible with communism.
Therefore, King's not a Christian. You're saying he's not a Christian, so he's actually very compatible with communism.
Precisely. That's exactly the point. So if what am I to do with this argument that, well, King said that there's no companionship between Christianity and communism, that they're incompatible. And you say that to say what exactly?
I'm saying that to say that the charge that you level against him of being a Marxist,
But it
communist,
insinuates that that he's a Christian, though.
well, he may very well have seen himself that way. You're asking me to judge his sort of spiritual fitness 60 plus years after he drew his last breath. I mean, you put all I can go on is the things that he said. So if I hear somebody who says, "No, I profess to be a Christian, but I reject substitutionary atonement. I object the bodily resurrection of Christ," I would say, "Well, you that don't sound Christian to me." Now,
Well,
that speaks to
that
whether. But again, I think these are slightly different things, because someone can feel that they're a true believer, right?
Doesn't matter
Someone
what
can be
feels.
no, but then that's a different question, because God is the ultimate judge. And what I'm saying is, someone can be sincere in their beliefs, but their faith not be genuine.
That's why we have the Word. That's why we have the
Right,
Bible.
right. But none of that discounts the fact that he was making a claim that one of the core tenets of communism is the rejection of organized religion. It's not just ambivalent to organized religion, it's hostile to it. And he was writing that this is one of the reasons why communism and Christianity are incompatible. Now, your response to that is almost never, or not just, "Oh, King wasn't a Christian." Your response typically to that is, he plagiarized it and he was lying. But what I'm saying is, when King writes about his theological views, which you and I would both argue put him outside of biblical orthodoxy, those things you believe.
Yeah, it's actually a moot argument, because the thing is, again, like, yes, I do tend to go to he plagiarized that, because he did. I mean, anybody can go read the book right now. It was written in 1951 by Robert J. McCracken, called Questions People Ask. And specifically on the question of communism, if you read what he said, and if you read what King would later say about it in 1957, and then throughout the remainder of his years, he's actually copying, in some cases verbatim, and then in other cases ideas that originated with McCracken. And so that's a disingenuous piece as far as I'm concerned, because when you look at the fact that communists are utilitarians, and not only that, they lift ideas and they lift talking points and slogans from all over the place. It's kind of like an amalgamation of different things to kind of get into the good graces of the people. That is in fact the ultimate goal. Let me say the thing that's going to resonate with the most people, to then push a sinister agenda. That's part of their framework. That's part of what they do. Lenin himself said that it's not above us to lie, to steal, to do whatever we can, so long as we can push our goal, push our agenda. And of course, I'm paraphrasing him. But again, King was part of this kind of this framework, is part of this kind of milieu. And to say, Delano, I'm going to put this out there one last time. To say, well, King said that communism and Christianity are incompatible. The insinuation when such an argument is made that King himself was a Christian, therefore he was saying that there's no way that he can actually have companionship with communists. There's no way that he can actually have camaraderie with people who possess or who hold to, or who are devotees to the communist ideology or the communist agenda. That's the insinuation that's being made. And so that's the reason why this kind of association piece is important. I understand that in academia, the fallacy of guilt by association is typically dismissed. I understand that, but here it actually does apply, because per you, King himself said that there's no companionship between Christianity. There's no compatibility between Christianity and communism. So why is it that the number one financier of the Communist Party and of Soviet action in America, why is that the leader, or basically your most trusted advisor? You don't have to take my word for it. Again, go read Dangerous Friendship. Again, somebody who's not ideologically on my side wrote the book. You can actually get into the kind of inner circle, the kind of inner conversations between the two of them. Why is it? According to the most recently released FBI files, you find that there's a line of communication between the SELC and the USSR, communicating by way of Soviet intelligence assets, communicating by way of intermediaries. Why is there that connection there? And again, King knew about this. It wasn't as though he was just this hopeless, this blind, deaf and dumb puppet who didn't know anything.
Blind, deaf and dumb is crazy.
You know what I mean? He understood the connections that Leveson had, and that's exactly why he was so willing to trust him as an advisor. Go where he say go, do what he say do, say what he said say.
So he was a puppet. I mean, that's
he was a puppet, but he wasn't a blind puppet. He was fully aware of what was going on.
In any of these FBI communications, do we have Dr. King on record as, again, stating he either wants to abolish the family, abolish organized religion, a complete federalization of industry, a classless or stateless society? Is there any evidence of that in the secret community, not the public, in the secret communications?
Well, MLK received the first Margaret Sanger Award, and we know what Margaret Sanger was about, for the Negro Project. So sure, he might not have been open about it, but definitely a lot of people believed in him. Let's go.
Yes, of course. If you look at, I'm not sure about the FBI files per se.
Okay.
I can't remember where I read this, but people can find where King is talking about, especially in 1967, 1968, in their private SCLC meetings, he's talking about the goals of what they call democratic socialism, which do include some of those planks that you lay out.
Which
so
one
of course,
specifically?
He's talking about, for example, the nationalization of industry, a classless society. He's talking about
And that's the term he used, because again, this is, now we have a debate, and neither of us has resources in front of us. So I like to be very specific on terms, right? I want to know, give me as close as a characterization of what he was saying when he was talking about a classless society. Because if you're going to say, well, what he was saying is he wanted to get rid of income inequality, that's something very, very different. So what was it that he was actually saying?
Well, you don't even have to look at the private conversations. I mean, if you look at, for example, the speech that he delivered to Stanford, which is interesting, just to take it back real quick to the I Have a Dream speech, where he's talking about 100 years after emancipation, the Negro still is not free. And he says 100 years later, the Negro still is not free. And then again, he ends the speech, free at last, free at last. And so the question then becomes, well, how then must the Negro get his freedom? And he had the opportunity to answer that question again and again and again. And so when you look at the Stanford University speech, the same speech where he says that he's against riots, but in a real sense, riots are the language of the unheard. So again, he's talking out of both sides of his mouth, and he's saying that it's actually the conditions, blaming the quote unquote system, that led to the Negro rioting in the streets. And he says, if the Negro is to get his equality, we must have wealth redistribution and the guaranteed annual income and all these things for poor people. And so while I take the fact that you said, well, this conservative is for the UBI and that conservative is for the UBI, like, to me, that means very little, especially when you consider all of the other realities surrounding King in terms of his education, in terms of his father, and the fact that his dad would frequent these communist front organizations in the South before King was born. He was part of, again, this framework and this milieu. When you consider, again, the interaction and the correspondence, much of which are available right now in the King papers. I think there's 7 or 8 volumes of them. When you consider, again, who were his most trusted advisors, not his associates, but his advisors, most trusted advisors who did have the communist ties. And when you look at the way, again, that communist functioned throughout the Cold War in terms of their fellow travelers, in terms of their dupes of subversion, in terms of their functionaries, in terms of, I forget the other 2 categories that they put you in. But when you look at this and you look at the civil rights movement, and then you look at the correspondence, and then you look at the FBI files, it's undeniable.
I'm still waiting for you to tell me. Again, I'm asking, and the reason I ask about the private correspondence is because I could go with you that a person may say, you know what, I'm not going to advocate for certain things publicly, but privately, then you can see what
Ain't
I
that
really
why it's
believe.
private though?
And I've yet to hear you say, right? King was saying, again, I'm looking at some of the markers, particularly of Marxism. I've heard him speak, and I've seen him write. I've read things that he's spoken in terms of advocating democratic socialism. But if you ask 100 political people what is democratic socialism, some may say, oh, some of the Scandinavian countries practice it, some other countries practice it. Some may say it can be large social welfare spending within a larger context of free market, capitalism. Some may say, well, Social Security, Medicaid, Medicare, publicly funded police departments, fire departments, these are all democratically socialist, policies and programs. So there's going to be difference there. But again, if you're bringing a charge against a man, and it's a heavy charge, the evidence should be overwhelming. And that's why I'm asking you, and this is where we go from the characterizations. This is where we go from the associations, from using words like nefarious and allowing people to sort of
it must be
hold on.
It must be said real quick though that not all the correspondence, the private conversations are released. I don't have access to that.
Also, I just wanted to define evidence for me. Is it statements of facts, or can what is that? Because, and I'm gonna go back to a real world example.
Okay.
Again, you've been with Fearless from the outset, and so you've seen me partner with Anthony Walker, Virgil Walker, T.J. Moe, Gaston Mooney, Bobby Harrington, Tyler Carden, and it's like I'm trying to influence the culture through the Fearless deal. You've heard me talk about like, hey, these are the things I like about you, Delano, and your background that fit what I'm trying to do. And so I just rattled off the names from TJ to Gaston to Anthony Walker, Virgil, blah, blah, blah. So I've rattled off 6 names.
Right.
If 3 of my closest advisors during the time you've grown Fearless, if 3 of them were flaming gays, would you not make some assumptions about me and what I was trying to accomplish here?
I would. That would be an interesting sort of group of friends.
You would make some assumptions. If they were instrumental parts of what I was doing, these are the people that I talk to on a daily basis about what I'm doing, what we're trying to accomplish. They're giving me advice. If 3 of them were gay,
right,
you would be like, man, there's some evidence here that Whitlock's not trying to live out this biblical stuff he's talking about. Well, that would be seen as evidence. My actions. You're talking about, do we have King on record saying, hey, I'm a communist and I want to destroy the family? Does he say that anywhere? He doesn't have to. He's associated with communists who want to destroy Christianity, religion, the family. They want to subvert America.
But that's not what he was advocating for. That's my point. So if you go
his actions. I could come on this show right now and say I'm pro-Christianity.
Correct.
But my right-hand man is a flaming gay guy.
Brother.
Right.
That would contradict, and people would be like, man, I don't believe Whitlock. Whitlock ain't telling the truth.
Okay,
let's trying to convert them to Christianity.
Hold on, but let's flip it around. If you were saying I'm pro-gay, I'm pro-LGBT, but your closest advisor was a Christian, then what would be the conclusion I should draw?
That would be he's contradicting himself.
But the contradiction, you can say there's a contradiction between who you hang around and the things that you say publicly. What I'm saying, that's different than saying than who you hang around. That's different than saying that your associations are going to always color your actions. Because again, if you were saying I'm pro-gay, but I realized, but then people said, Whitlock's 3 closest advisors are Christian, I wouldn't therefore say, well, then Whitlock must be Christian. I wouldn't say that. And I don't think you would say that.
I would think you would say, though, I think gays would say, man, I don't know if he's really sincere about that, or he'd have some gay people up there advising him. And
what would the Christians say? That's the question.
What would Christians say?
Correct. Would they accept you because you have advisors who are Christian, even though you were promoting?
I would hope that if I were on this show promoting gayness, I would hope that Christians wouldn't watch.
Okay.
And as a Christian, didn't RuPaul have a show at some point? I never watched.
Right.
Don't have an interest in it.
Right.
And there's Ellen DeGeneres has a show. Never watched. Because it's not for me.
So let's tie it together then, because we have.
I don't know about that one, Jason.
You and I, all 3 of us can agree that in the example you gave, there's a contradiction between the advisors and what the principal is saying in public. And what you said is that you would hope that Christians, right, Now, these are the people who would be in the tribe of the advisors. You would hope that they would not watch. The parallel would be, okay, King, I'm using Chad's argument. King is being advised by communists, but he's not promoting communism. He's promoting the
the Cold War element.
I think you disagree there.
Okay.
Let me just. He's promoting the eradication of Negro second-class citizenship and calling for civil rights laws that respect the Negro's right to vote and public accommodation. That's what he's promoting. And in the example you gave, the people who would be frustrated would be the communists. In the example you gave,
Well, there were people, and Chad could make this argument, but it's not Chad. There were people in real time.
All right, I'm gonna stop for a second, and to answer your question, yeah, we'll be jumping on the candy train very shortly. Let me move my camera over. All right, we'll be jumping on the candy train very shortly. She's supposed to be going live in a few minutes. I think part of the problem, well, first of all, I don't think Jason Whitlock as the moderator should have jumped in. I think Chad should have remained in the discussion. The problem, in my opinion, is that you are going to have to search really high and really wide and really long to find biblical preaching from MLK. That's the problem. And so it's not a situation where MLK is faithfully preaching, faithfully pastoring, but he has friends that are communists. No, I'm saying, and I think Chad would probably agree, that MLK was not a faithful pastor. He was not faithfully shepherding his community, his congregation, and his friends were communists. So that's the part I think a lot of people are not aware of. I myself, I was taken aback when somebody asked me, I apologize. I want to say it was actually Chad who proposed to me the idea that MLK wasn't a Christian. And I immediately said, what are you talking about, bruh? Like, what are you talking about? He was Reverend MLK. I made all the same arguments. And he said, well, can you show me anywhere that he actually preached the gospel? And I couldn't find it. Now, I'm not saying just mention Jesus in passing, not saying mention God, not even saying that somebody needs to get saved. That's not what I'm saying. But an actual gospel sermon. You're not going to find it. And from there, a lot of the other things start making more sense. So again, like, how are you faithfully pastoring when you're jet setting around the nation every week, every day almost? Like, how are you taking care of this congregation? So there were some real serious questions that I think people should have about MLK. Now, wherever you land, you're going to land there. I'm not going to try to sway you. We'll come back to Chad and Delano Squires debating on MLK's legacy. We'll bring that back. I'll let them argue it out. All I want you to do is just do some research. Just do some research on your own. Just say, hey, I'm going to go find a faithful, gospel-centric, Christ-honoring sermon by MLK so I can email management at dearwokec@gmail.com and prove Jason wrong. Do that. Prove me wrong. Or I'm going to find, just do it. Just do it. And I'll be here. I'll still be here when you get back. So that's the problem. I think Chad, I love Chad. He's my dude. I got no problem with Chad. I got no problem with Delano. I don't think Delano's a bad person. I got problems with Jason Whitlock, but that's beside the point. I just think he got I wish his name was different. But the issue that I think is on the table is that we're not looking at this we're looking at this from the world looking out, and we should be looking from the church looking out. And from there, from the scriptures, even more importantly than that, from the scriptures looking out, would MLK fall under the guise of a Christian? I think you'd honestly, you'd be hard pressed to make that argument. I know. So I know there's a lot of people who disagree with me. Okay, dearwokec@gmail.com. Okay, whatever. It is what it is. I'm not here to try to change your mind on the matter. I will say this though, your girl, I'm assuming that we got the audio fixed. I did a couple tests yesterday. I believe I found the problem. When we get done with Candace, I'm gonna probably let her talk a whole lot more today. I'm not going to try to stop a whole lot. I don't know really what she's going to talk about, but what I'll do is try to end this so we can get back and finish up that, or maybe we'll do that tomorrow. We can finish that tomorrow. I would say start with the MLK papers. Start with the MLK papers. If you want to start there, you can do some general research on sermons. on MLK sermons. Just listen to his sermons or find his sermons and search through them and find me a gospel-centric sermon. Not just come to Jesus at the end of a social gospel TED Talk, but a real gospel-centric sermon. I really think you'd be surprised. I'll just say it like that. You'll be surprised how hard you're gonna have to find something that looks like, sounds like, is a gospel-centric sermon from Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. My name is Jason. So I appreciate y'all. Thank y'all so much to the 221 that already jumped up in here. Thank y'all so much. Please make sure you hit that like button. It means a lot. It helps out a lot. If you haven't already subscribed, go ahead and subscribe. If you are subscribed, double check that you haven't been inadvertently unsubscribed and anything of that nature. I don't want that to happen to you, to my people. So looking at your girl, she's going to be talking about the wolf of finance. He's been getting shellacked on Twitter, so she's got to jump out there, which tends to be the case. People who support Candace tend to have to get, Candace has to come in and provide air support because it's just not going to work any other way. It's like she has to come in and support them because otherwise their tails, again, look at Mitch, look at Wolf of Finance, look at others whom have come in for her to support her, and they themselves are found wanting, only for her to have to come in and provide air support. And again, air support that is blanks. I love it. I love it. So I got her queued up. So you got the audio loud. We're gonna see tonight. I believe we fixed the audio issue, so it won't be low anymore. So y'all, pray there. And there's a lot of other problems. Thank you so much for this, Kimberly. There's a lot of things with MLK that need to be discussed. I haven't even gotten into some of those allegations, but I just want you to just do the research. Look for yourself. Say, hey, I want to find a good Christ-honoring, gospel-centric sermon by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And start from there. And then ask yourself, why is it so hard to find one? But you can find a sermon. You'll take a nanosecond to find a sermon about social justice. You'll take a nanosecond to find something about wealth redistribution or racism or doing away with Jim Crow, but nothing about what to do with your eternal soul. Just something to think about. So thank y'all so much. I really appreciate y'all tapping in. Let's get this show going. Do this right here. She is supposed to be popping in. So let me go ahead and put this up on the screen. All right. So we know she's here. We know what's going on. The recorded show is ready. Let's go. All right. Here's your boy right here. Oh, I didn't even do bingo today. Ay. I'm sorry. I didn't even do bingo. I got time to pull that up. I didn't even put the bingo board on there today. I'm not, you know why? Because I want to make sure this doesn't go like super long in the extra innings. Then y'all go with this bingo. That's what I get. All right, let me pull it in real quick. I got time. All right. The mod should actually have the list, have the game. All right, there's a bingo game. Let me pull mine up. I'm going to play on the side. Let's see. All right, I got a good bingo board. I know I'm feeling it today. Ooh. I don't know. This one might be tough because this looks like it's got a lot of stuff in here. Oh, I definitely got to get rid of some of these. I got to clean this up now. All right, so my bingo board, again, I need to clean this. I need to go through and clean this up. Vibes, Bible reference, Erica, Fez, Ben Shapiro, Planes, Betrayal, Israel, Tip Line shout out. YouTuber, military, Mitch, psyops. All right, we're gonna get ready to go. She's jumped in. Let's go.
But we found out something stunning about Dan Flood. that apparently everybody missed. And this is actually potentially a game changer,
Everything's
or
a game
rather,
changer.
it might reveal how the entire game works. It makes
Oh my
perfect sense now
gosh.
to me that the feds are doing
The
nothing
feds.
to investigate Charlie Kirk's assassination. Speaking of which, Turning Point USA has done a
TPUSA.
thing. They've done a thing. They sent a cease and desist letter to a relatively small YouTuber, Wolves and Finance. We've shown a clip of Wolves and Finance on the show once. I assume that this means that Andrew Colvett is still heading up the PR department because it's a disaster. Welcome back to Candace.
Okay, so all right, y'all know what we're gonna do. Let's bring it in. Let's go. All right, here she comes, people. Let's see what she got to say. Let's go.
Okay, before we get started, a quick thank you to Nimi Skincare for supporting the show.
All right, appreciate it, y'all. Let's get this. Y'all, make sure you hit that like button if you don't mind. I appreciate y'all jumping in. This is gonna be an interesting one, so we might as well make it good. Make sure you hit that like button, all that kind of good jazz like that. Let's see. Let's go.
Crazy, crazy, crazy what I'm about to tell you. And how I discovered it is actually even crazier. So you might imagine that I get a lot of emails, some of which are a little less than sane. I will say that. That's putting it mildly. And there
Did
was
you
this
read
one
those?
guy who was emailing me consistently saying that, first and foremost, he knew that Charlie was going to be assassinated, all sorts of things that immediately made my eyebrow raise, obviously. For example, he said that he knew who killed JFK. A group of people, he said, killed JFK.
Because
All
that's
right,
perfectly
buddy,
normal.
that's what I was thinking, I'm sure. He said that the families of those who had orchestrated the murder of JFK, corrupt cops, mafia members, I believe, obviously, that, yeah, they were a part of the ensemble. But he said that those same families were also involved in the assassination of Charlie Kirk, a group of Texas boys. I'm like, right, sure, got it, not answering this. He even said that Golda Meir, the one-time prime minister of Israel, well, her and Lyndon Baines, he said, are brother and sister, and he knows this for a fact. Now, I'd say that's the most convincing thing he said, because they are absolute twins. But anyway, obviously, I was not biting on any of this, because even if it were true, what am I going to do with all this information? Like, I can't get into a time machine and call for new elections in 1963. I already hate Lyndon Baines Johnson for free. I already think he's involved in JFK's assassination. And Golda Meir, look, I'm not exactly known as the voice of the Israeli people. So then he starts emailing me in another inbox, and he says something to the effect of, I see that you have tunnel vision and all you care about is Charlie Kirk's assassination. So why don't I tell you about how that worked, so that maybe you will begin to see the bigger picture here? And he says, and I'm going to put in a very strong allegedly here, because I don't have any proof of this, but it's relevant that I tell you this to get to the part where I do have proof of what he's saying. He says that allegedly all of the bought and paid for cops throughout America are a part of what's known as the cattleman's ball, colloquially, the cattle baron ball, which he claims is just one big, massive money laundering operation from Israel to buy off cops here in America. He claims that he was a part of it, by the way. So basically, this guy's implicating himself in a crime. Now, in case you're wondering off the bat, did I report this crime? I obviously have not even heard back from the feds regarding my initial report into what happened to Charlie Kirk. So why would I waste my time?
Notice she doesn't mention the fact that she says that she was that they put a hit out on her. Notice she doesn't mention that. Like, that should be the biggest thing that she brings up. Not even Charlie Kirk. Like, wait, there are people who are coming after me, but she doesn't mention it. Yo, this woman is insane. People know this. Crazy people know where to send their crazy ideas to. Yo, and you know this is going to get trashed in like 8 seconds. They're already probably trashing on Twitter.
Building upon the reports when I haven't heard from them. Okay, that doesn't make any sense. Not really. They're not really investigating things. I think we all accept that at this point. Anyway, for a little bit of background here, in case you're not familiar with sometimes known as the cattleman's ball.
How do you know
more
that?
correctly should be known as the cattle's baron ball down in Dallas, Texas.
Oh,
It's
man.
a single night fundraiser for the American Cancer Society. And it's massive. To be clear, it's the world's largest single night fundraiser. It was founded 50 years ago in Dallas, Texas, and now it's basically spread its tentacles into other states, presumably, again, fighting cancer. And we can pull up the website here so you can see multiple states that they're in. Majority Texas, obviously, but you can also see they got Kansas, Oregon, and some other states. Florida, Orlando, Florida's up there. Nebraska also once hosted its own Cattle Barons Ball that might be relevant. They eventually, from the Cattle Barons Ball, minted their own separate 501c3 referred to as Cattlemen's Ball, which is the same exact idea, but it benefits.
Wait, if they started 50 years ago, how are the cattlemen responsible for JFK's assassination? Okay, never mind, man. Like, wouldn't they have been before? When JFK had died? Never mind. Yo, this woman. We got planes, trains, and automobiles. Yo, this woman is insane. Wow, what in the world? Okay, we are not gonna be here all night, y'all. I'm sorry.
Different cancer center, the Fred and Pamela Buffett Cancer Center. Same idea, different beneficiary. Now, again, I want to assert that I cannot confirm those claims.
Then why are you saying it?
Paid off. I'm telling you that because the next piece he gave me, I was able to research. Again, paraphrasing, but he kept going on with, you're obsessed with Fort Huachuca. You think Charlie has been tracked for a while, right? Well,
but Fort Huachuca was supposed to be the creme de la creme, the linchpin of all of this. Now, y'all, now we got cows up in here. We got planes, trains, automobiles, and cows. This is crazy work, y'all. Now the Egyptian planes, they just zipping around, turning off their transponders. They ain't got no accountability. Candace, we need you to keep hold of planes accountable. Holy goodness, y'all. Leave Texas alone. Texas ain't bothering you, Candy. Yo, this is... Okay, we just go, Jason. Just go.
You haven't even figured out who Dan Flood is. Dan Flood is connected to both. You think it was an inside job from the feds, and none of you guys have even worked out who Dan Flood's father is.
Now his dad?
Okay. Now you've got my attention, and you guys, I don't know how I missed it. I don't know how I missed it.
Oh, we know.
Just say,
I'm playing
LOL
bingo.
To the idea that the feds are going to do anything to look into what happened on September 10th. Because let me introduce to you guys Dan Flood's daddy, Mr. Robert Eugene Flood. Okay, now you're seeing his picture up here. Yep, 33, always got to see it. 33 years with the Texas A&M University Police Department Chief Deputy Robert Flood. It tells us the 232nd session, retired after 35 years of law enforcement in Illinois and Texas. I want you to remember that, Illinois and Texas. His last assignment was with the Bosque County, Texas Sheriff's Office. Okay. Now we're going to pull up his LinkedIn because it's a bit of a journey.
Why don't you pull up Tucker Carlson's dad's LinkedIn? Why don't you pull up that? So just because your dad works for the police office, that means something. Y'all, please stop this woman.
Journey, okay. It tells us that he, and honestly, I don't know if you can scroll to the bottom here so we can go bottom up and kind of get into, first and foremost, yes, FBI, graduated from the FBI National Academy. It tells us that state of Texas master peace officer. But if you can go to scroll up a bit, and we're going to just go to, show all 10 experiences and scroll from the bottom. So we can look at this live. Okay, so we know he's a Marine. We learned that
That's
he was
terrible.
a staff sergeant for the Marines, and he was particularly in charge of surveillance and target acquisition, small arms and weapons, tactical radio communications, aviation ordnance, and weapons systems. You scroll up, and it tells us that he was working in Franklin Park, Illinois for over a decade. That's right on the basically a couple of streets over from where Charlie Kirk was raised. And I was going, okay, that's really interesting.
I'm going to tell you something real quick. When Candace doesn't have anything, she starts the show off with the most ridiculous aspect of her of the show. The early, and I keep telling y'all, the beginning of the show is the longest segment, right? And so you would probably want to put the most important stuff there because that's where the most attention is going to be. But she always brings in the most ancillary, craziest theory. And the one that should be the one that gets the most attention, the wolf of finance, the financial wolf dude, that should have been where she started with today, right? And the cease and desist letters. No, that's going to get like a passing glance between two commercial breaks because she really doesn't have anything. So she doesn't want to put that out there because she knows that Wolf of Finance guy has already been debunked by Tim Pool, by Gary, and by countless others. So she doesn't want that to really get out there. So she's going to start with this that's going to numb you to sleep. That's why she does this kind of stuff. If you follow her, that's exactly what she does all the time. Let's go.
I then tried to find a single trace of his name mentioned in the news in Illinois. You would think if you were a, as it states here, crime scene technician, SWAT team leader, patrol division supervisor, criminal investigator, there would be tons of articles about. I couldn't find
Why
anything.
not?
Doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It just means that I could not find anything at first, second, and third glance. Okay, then this random Electro Rent Corporation, which runs from Tokyo, Japan to Chicago. Let me know if you guys know what that is. Then we learned he became a lieutenant colonel in the Army Reserve. Okay, we can scroll up here. Then he retired as a lieutenant colonel. He was then the captain of police, and some of this is concurrent, so it's interesting for the University Park Police back down in Texas, chief deputy sheriff for Texas law enforcement. It goes on, okay?
Because
This
that's really
guy,
bad.
no question,
He worked. Okay, fine. He had a job. Like, praise the Lord.
is and was a Fed. And then it interestingly
Whoa.
tells us.
How did you make the jump that he was a
that
Fed? Hold on. Just because he worked in the military, now he's a Fed?
he joined the FBI AA. So,
What?
in case you're like me and you have no idea what the FBI AA is, that stands for the Federal Bureau of Investigation's Agent Association, which is another charity founded in 1981. I can't believe this is legal, but I guess if you're the feds, it's all legal. Founded in 1981, where former and current feds come together to, and this is directly from their website, help FBI special agents join together to protect and advance the interests of their profession. Okay, what does that mean? A bunch of agents are coming together. That's according to their website. It says that their force, this FBI AA, consists of 14,000 former and current feds. Now, again, this is a charity. So if I'm a billionaire, I could just cut a check and buy me some federal officers. Again, I'm asking questions. That's how it works in charity world. We're learning that with Turning Point USA. The bigger the check you cut, the more influence you have on their operations. You get to tell them what they think about, what they talk about. So if I write a $10 million check to the FBI AA, do I have federal officers in every state? Anyway, yes, Dan Flood's family, as you can see, both his mother and his father, by the way, are from Illinois, just where Charlie, the same area that Charlie came up in. And though I cannot assert this, I can't say this with certainty, I would be willing to bet that Mr. Flood, Dan's father, Robert Eugene Flood, probably knew Bill Montgomery, the guy who convinced Charlie to start Turning Point USA in Illinois, in the same neighborhood. Don't forget, Bill Montgomery was also military as well. He was Air Force. And now to clarify, because I got a lot of emails about this, the X-Men school, I could be referring to as the X-Men school that Charlie went to after they wanted to drug him for being brilliant, and his mother said no. That school is Quest Academy in Palatine, Illinois. It was formerly named the Children's Creative Academy. I maintain my belief that Charlie was being monitored by the government since he was young. And it was Bill Montgomery who organized.
Real quick, I'm not trying to be funny. I'm not trying to be funny. I want God's unrestrained judgment on Candace Owens. Okay, y'all can call me whatever you want to call me. My name is Jason. I want God to judge Candace swiftly. I mean, millstone, hellfire, brimstone. She is now putting a school that has nothing to do with Charlie Kirk at all on the radar of her in complete and total lunatic base. She just put it out there for no reason. Who cared? Nobody was losing sleep about where Charlie Kirk went to elementary school, this special school that he was supposed to go to. Nobody cares. And she also has not shown you any proof that he actually was going to that school or would have gone to that school. So now this school is now up for grabs. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. My name is Jason. You can call my pastor, whatever. You can email management. I want God to judge Candace. I mean, lightning bolts. I don't care about frogs, flies, darkness, boils, bad hair follicles. I want everything. I want the full Monty on Candace. Lord, please do it quickly. Good gracious, man. Like, she's literally in the world that we're currently in. Now, mind you, she can't seem to come up with anything to say about that Antifa craziness that happened in Minnesota this past weekend. But she can talk about this from a source. Lord, please judge this woman.
And initially paid, you should know, for the full-time security that Charlie would need. He arranged that. Bill Montgomery chose to hire Schaefer Security, which was run by Greg Schaefer. And working under Greg Schaefer was Dan Flood and Brian Harpole. And there's no mystery regarding Greg Schaefer, okay? He also is from Dallas, Texas, working for the FBI on the elite hostage and rescue team. He was a supervisor on the Dallas Joint Terrorism Task Force. And get this, also another Eastern European connection because he was also a part of their organization in Budapest, Hungary. If you didn't know, the FBI also has sub-offices all around the globe. And Greg was at least stationed in Budapest. He probably was stationed in other places. So Bill Montgomery, you got this guy. He hires Greg Schaefer and Dan Flood, and they're going to stay with Charlie forever. Brian Harpole. So we jump back into the narrative because it's going to get even more interesting. We had closed out last week informing you about New Braunfels, Texas, because people on the internet who had been tracking Erica's plane noticed that it kept going to this seemingly random city in Texas. And we dismissed that as potentially a nothing burger or something that makes sense, a sensible burger, because Turning Point's #1 donor, who last year in June cut a check for $10 million, the couple, Nelda and Carl Buckman, they live there, okay? What we didn't know at the time, we didn't know until this weekend, is that they aren't the only ones that live there. Dan Flood also lives in New Braunfels, Texas. I can confirm that. That's a fact. The question is why? What or who inspired Dan, who is from Allen, Texas, to move out to New Braunfels? That's where he graduated high school, by the way, in Allen, Texas. We know that for a fact because one of his high school buddies after the assassination posted this. Bro, the head of Charlie Kirk's security team, the guy they say is in on it was my friend as a kid. We grew up together. I went to middle and high school with Dan Flood. Matter of fact, last time I saw him, he was doing security for some Dallas billionaire at the Cattlemen's Ball. What a crazy small world. Yeah, this dude has been in private security for at least 20 years. I had no idea he was running it for TPUSA. I would like to know, since he happened to mention the should-be cattle Barons Ball in Texas where he ran into him, who were the billionaires that Dan was working with? I think that could be a very interesting thing to know, don't you? Couldn't that be interesting to know? Because there have been a lot of things that are coming up here. We've noted that, oddly, all of Charlie's security that day was from Texas, from Rick Cutler to Dan Flood, even Brian Harpole.
Man, even Texas is catching strays, y'all. Now everybody from Texas is catching strays. Here, let me just show y'all real quick. My bingo board. I'm crushing it today. I ain't gonna even lie. I'm crushing it. She did say planes, so I'm gonna go with that. She did say Eric. I already got bingo. Yeah, man. Yo, man, this is crazy. Okay, let's get back to it, Jason. We're not gonna be here all night because I know y'all want to watch the debate with Chad and Delano. So let's get back to this. Let's get back. I'm gonna try to stay on task. I'm gonna try my best.
Brian Harpole, you should know, was also born in Dallas, Texas.
Oh my gosh.
His father, Bobby Harpole, back in 2018 when he was running for county sheriff in Erath, Texas, he gave an interview about his upbringing where he said, and I quote, "I was born in Denton, Texas, and grew up a quote unquote military brat, living in numerous states and Europe. I started my law enforcement career in 1968 with the Texas Department of Public Safety, living in Amarillo with the Texans. Childress, Amarillo, Floresville, and Stevensville. I retired from TDPS as a sergeant in highway patrol. I then went to work for the Erith County Sheriff's Office, and after 12 years of service, retired as captain. Okay, interesting. They have tons of military ties. It's unbelievable. In fact, now his dad is working at a funeral home, which feels interesting change of career there at the end. The point is that when you begin to look into Harpole's extensive military and law enforcement ties, it brings you to the Pacific, through Europe, and of course, all through Texas, just like the Flood family. And yes, it goes back decades, okay? All of this to say, maybe the Dallas Buyers Club might get a new meaning. What are we buying down in Dallas, actually? What did happen in 1963? Why did this person know that? He claims that he has worked with their families. Are we expected to believe that the feds are meaningfully investigating the feds? How does that work? As a hypothetical question, if Dan Flood and
Wait, did I hit it? I hit the button. I'm sorry, y'all.
Brian Harpole were actually guilty of organizing Charlie Kirk's assassination.
Oh
Yes,
my
hypothetical.
gosh.
Do you believe that the feds would turn them over?
Wow.
I'm thinking they wouldn't. And that was kind of the point of what this person was saying to me. It's like, this corruption goes back to Dallas in the 60s. You can't, there's nothing that anybody can do.
Notice she's showing you no hard evidence besides a random person who said that she says, I'm sorry, was from a friend of Dan Flood's from high school. She's showing you no other evidence that any of this happened. Wow. I'm kind of flabbergasted. Like, wow, she knows that there are lawsuits out there in the ether, right? She knows it's coming, and she's still talking this mad reckless. Wow. No evidence whatsoever. Not even soft evidence. Not even like nothing. She's literally just told us a story that she just again, she gets all. Just think about this. Just think about this. Is it fair to say that she probably gets 50,000 emails in all of her email boxes, but this one person keeps getting attention from her back to back to back, but she keeps leaving them on red. She doesn't really get with them, but she somehow or another he gets through the email system. Okay, all right, but now he has all of this. They said not evident adjacent. I love that. This is look, I want to get back to Chad, so let's go.
I thought it was an interesting tidbit that I wanted to give to you guys. We'll be right back after a brief break from our sponsors.
All right, so
all right, you guys.
Why did she do that? Like, again, like I think it's interesting that she started off. Let me just hold on. Let me do it like this. I'm gonna mute this and kind of give it a little run. It's funny that she started the whole show off with something such a big nothing that that's amazing. That's good. So all of that big swath of time, better than 10 minutes of the opening salvo of time, was used to talk about a story that's totally that's unsubstantiated. Really, let's go. Bring it back in, Jason. All right, let's go.
Conspiracy just dropped. I'm dropping a new conspiracy today for funsies. You know, in the movie Mean Girls, when Lindsay Lohan sabotages Regina George.
Why is that so funny? She keeps doing that.
At least by giving her these nutrient-dense bars from Africa, but telling Regina that the bars are actually going to help her lose weight. And then she realizes that she's been sabotaged and she screams. That's what I have to imagine is happening at Turning Point USA. Like somebody's just setting Erica Kirk up, right? It's probably Elizabeth McCoy. I feel like if I had, it's her because they're like best friends, and Elizabeth and Mikey are like in the shadows, like it's going to be us. We're going to be next. Turning Point is ours. And so she's pretending to be Erica's BFF, but secretly giving her the worst advice of all time. She's like, you should wear glitter tonight. Glitter. I don't think there's enough glitter. You need glitter on the makeup, head to toe, all of it. You look amazing. Charlie loved pyrotechnics, and he also liked that Nicki Minaj Monsterverse. I think you need both. We got to do both. We need to put the fun in funeral. I don't know. That's what I think. I think it's Elizabeth McCoy. Remember, it was Elizabeth McCoy. It
Wow.
was her idea to put the tent up. It's her. This is my conspiracy theory. It's Elizabeth McCoy. She's going to slide to that spot. And then she's going to wear black and she's going to actually mourn Charlie and be like, I don't know what Erica was thinking. She wants the throne. Anyways, that's my best excuse that I can offer. The best excuse that I can summon for every move that the organization is making, which
What
has
is she
just been
talking
disastrous.
about?
It's clown world over there. And now,
Wait.
to add to that, to snowball.
Hold on. Talking about Charlie Kirk as a time traveler and the multiverse and different string theory, that's not clown world. But you theorizing whatever you just said about Elizabeth McCoy, that's clown world. Y'all, we can't make this stuff up, man. Yeah, I do feel like I'm getting stupider watching this.
Someone has made the brilliant decision to send a cease and desist letter to a relatively small YouTube channel who's made interesting videos regarding the finances of Turning Point USA. Has he gotten everything?
Then if his channel, 350,000 subscribers, is small, I don't know what mine is. I mean, mine is like microscopic. Like what is mine? If that's a small channel, then mine is like microscopic. Mine is nano. It's like in the like, what are we doing here? We need PIM particles for my channel.
Of course not. We
Make sure
even
you
said
subscribe.
when he got something very wrong, like the wrong person, I tweeted and said, this is not the right person. You should take this down. And guess what? He immediately took it down and corrected it and removed it from his content. So this isn't like a bad faith actor by any means. It's Wolves in Finance. And I'm referring to the presenter, Zach Gregorio. I'm going to let him explain to you what happened. Take a listen.
This week, I received a letter from Turning Point titled Demand to Cease and Desist Defamatory Comments. This is the first step when someone sues you for defamation. I know there are a lot of people out there making videos about Turning Point, so you should pay attention to this. They have started sending out cease and desist letters, and for some reason, they've decided to start with me. Apparently, they cannot handle the criticism from my teeny tiny YouTube channel. This letter is showing the world the type of organization Turning Point has become under Erica Kirk. They want to send legal letters to small YouTube creators. So we're going to go through this letter. Now, it is nice that we have this letter with their official statements, but the letter does nothing to change my suspicions. It does not address most of my questions. Instead of answering my questions, it is the precursor to a lawsuit unless I change my statements. That does nothing to reduce my suspicions. For the sake of avoiding miscommunication, I can change the title of the video if that makes them more happy. I already changed it from More Fraud at Turning Point USA to More Fraud at Turning Point USA, allegedly.
I'm sorry. I just enjoy him. There's something about it. It's like
This is a very interesting point. Candace, if this is serious to Candace treats it all like it's a game. Now, we over here, we laugh at Candace because we think Candace is a game. We do think that Candace is an IQ test, but Candace takes everything as a joke. Everything is a joke. Like, why is that? I just wonder, why is it that she's joking about everything? Like everything. What is the deal? Okay, let's go. And he does sound like Candace. You're right. All right, let's go.
teeny tiny YouTube channel.
He's 300.
Allegedly. I enjoy that. I'm sorry for laughing at that because it's funny. It is funny. And it's ridiculous. Guys, I thought we left in 2025. I thought that I did this for everybody. You can't just sue people to make them shut up. We have to be done with that as a society. It is a uniquely American phenomenon of suing people for everything. You know, get into your car accidentally gently touches somebody else's car. Now you need the cops there. The insurance agency is getting involved. I mean, the whole scam of suing people just needs to end. Okay. It just needs to end. Get a job, work hard. If you feel that someone is putting out wrong information about you, don't start a cease and desist letter with, we don't intend to sue you. That's what he's saying is correct. That is exactly what a cease and desist is for. It's the first step to suing somebody.
But you don't have to get sued.
Otherwise, this could have been an email. If I got him to take something out of his video after I shared it. I said, this is incorrect. And he did it, when I say instantly, immediately took down the video and corrected it. Why can't Turning Point try to behave like a human and just have somebody email from the PR office, hey, Andrew, this could be you, and say, hey, I do PR for Turning Point USA. Happy to answer some of your questions. Just send them over. Or say, hey, you got this wrong. Do you mind please updating this? Like, it's like, this is not right. They have so much money. They just are spending money on stupidity. And again, what is your end goal? As he says later on, he's like, I don't have any money. What is your end goal here with sending this letter? It's obviously going to backfire. Right?
Actually, no, because the next person they send one to, they're going to respond quickly. They're going to make the adjustment. Maybe they will send a hey, you got this information wrong email. I bet you they'll fix it. So you over here showboating, Candace, you're not really helping that person at all. I'm just saying. You're not helping them.
I just want to say the energy of this. I have lawyers. I can sue you. I'm rich. It
Who
needed
says
to be
that?
left behind in 2025 with Brigitte Macron. Okay. And of course, it backfires immediately. It backfires spectacularly because now Turning Point is on record because of this video and because of this letter that they sent him. They are now on record going against themselves on record. We have received so many different stories from them regarding the drones that were there on the day of Charlie's assassination. First, Frank Turek came out and he said that while they were driving over to the event, he was showing Charlie live drone footage on his phone. And Charlie loved it. He was like, this is amazing. Then Brian Harpole, apparently unaware that Frank Turek had already told the truth, he moved to tell Sean Ryan that actually there were no drones because the university denied their request to fly them. And people were like, hey, wait a minute, that's ridiculous. You guys are saying two different statements. Why does it look like you're lying all the time? So, of course, Andrew Colvett came out, swooped in with his always perfecting PR, and he said this regarding the mix-up. Take a listen.
Early on, Frank Turek talked about that on the way there that, he actually was looking at Charlie's phone and he saw drone footage from the event. Now, I had talked to, with that in mind, number one, I went to UVU and I actually put the drone up. We were going to do the survey. Immediately, we were, law enforcement came up and said, hey, look, we need you to take down that drone. Now, my drone pilot had already made all the necessary steps with the FFA to make sure that we could do that. And I explained to the law enforcement officer, hey, look, you guys don't control this airspace. But he's like, well, we got policies, you have to do this. And we're not going to sit there and argue with them, right? So we ended up grounding the drone. We went and jumped through some hoops. We were trying to get some documents done. Long story short, what we ended up having to do was leave campus. We flew the drone. We were off campus. We flew the drone. We got the survey. So that kind of reinforced other people saying, Brian Harpole specifically saying, like, hey, we couldn't get permission to get a drone up in the air. And of course, people took that, what Frank said at the beginning, and said, hey, this is clear indication of lying and or a conspiracy. Well, what I found out was the picture that was being pushed around saying, hey, this is proof that there was drone footage was actually, it was very clear to me once I saw that picture. It is a wide angle shot of the crowd.
And let's
from
throw that up.
floor.
Yeah, let's throw that up.
Yeah.
This is actually I think the images, guys, I sent them to you. Yeah, this is actually, there was a walkway or a bridge elevated that was just from our events team that was setting up that event. They went up there to, as they always did, to show Charlie the crowd size. So they took those images.
No, yeah, and I completely understand
20
why.
seconds, Gary.
Frank,
yeah,
I understand why Frank thought this was a drone, but again, I think it almost shows that the lack of conspiracy, because you guys aren't sitting in there, micromanaging what people say. It's just different people's perspectives, and there isn't some sort of collusion.
So what did he say wrong? What did Frank say wrong? Gary did a great job. Candace, why have you not gone there to the school? Why have you not FOIA'd the police of UVU to ask them this question before you say whatever retarded is about to spew out of your mouth? Why don't you actually go check? See, this is the part. But she's going to sit there and she's going to call an expert a liar. So let's let her go.
Yeah, that's really nice. Except now Turning Point USA's lawyer is going to dispute Andrew, and the worst PR, the worst person that PR money could buy, Paramount Tactical, because in the letter to Wolves in Finance, he says, no, there were drones, but it was only allowed for some people. But there were drones that day. Take a listen.
On December 7th, I posted a video called Top 10 Clowns of the Year. In this video, I called Turning Point my #1 clown of the year. I talked about the now infamous interview with Turning Point's chief security person talking about the day that Charlie Kirk was murdered. I point out the massive contradiction where he says they were not allowed to fly drones. Then I show the interview with Frank Turek where he says he was watching drone footage with Charlie Kirk. This part is breaking news because I'm not aware this has ever been discussed. The lawyer in this letter says the following: there was no discrepancy. UVU prohibited Turning Point USA from flying drones for security purposes during the event, but
Stop.
did allow a Turning Point USA media production drone to briefly fly over the location before the event to collect limited B-roll footage.
That's consistent, you clown.
How could this be defamatory if I had no idea about any of this? Second, I find this explanation absurd. You are telling me that the security team was not allowed drones, but the media team was?
Then why don't you call, again, instead of Candace laughing about it, which just seems weird if she's so torn up inside about Charlie Kirk's assassination, why don't you reach out to the school to confirm this and get another perspective? But even more than that, the gentleman has not said anything inconsistent. Now she's going to transliterate it as whatever she wants to. This is crazy work, y'all. Let's go.
That is the official explanation from Turning Point's lawyer. My honest opinion is I do not believe that. But if that did happen, that is really silly, and it may have cost Charlie Kirk his life.
He is all of us. It's so absurd. Guys, you've had so much time to get your story straight. Were there drones? Were there not drones? Now, it's okay, there were drones, but only some people could have them. The media team was allowed to fly drones temporarily, and then he saw that. We were just told by Paramount Tactical and Andrew that was just the wide shot that Frank saw. Now we're like, oh no, the media team, that is what happened. They were allowed to fly drones, but security couldn't. What?
Notice,
media
media during the event. During the event, that's consistent with what Frank Turek said, that they shot the drone footage before the event. So even if they put it in the air and took that wide shot and then brought it back down, that's before the event, Candace. Like, you got to be kidding me that you're this obtuse. You got to be kidding me. And they're gonna fillet her on Twitter. I can't wait.
Fly drones temporarily to get a shot, but you're not going to let the security team fly drones temporarily to get a shot.
Reach out to the school and ask them, Candace.
Doesn't make any sense. And by the way, hey, Brian Harpole, how about being resourceful? If you figured out the media team could do it and they could get it to Frank, why didn't they get it to you?
Why don't you reach out to the school and ask if they did or not? Then you would catch them in a real lie. If the school says no, we allowed them to. See, but you're not going to do that because you're a beanhead.
Rooftops looked like
smooth brain.
Oh, I know, because you're all lying. That's pretty obvious by now. You're all lying. Please just stop lying about everything. Because eventually, what's happening is what we're going through right now. The public is having to decide whether or not you have been making genuine mistakes repeatedly, or if you have been fibbing nonstop at all hours of every day because you're engaged in a cover-up. And I am of the latter opinion. I have been for a while. There are just too many inconsistencies at all time. It's not that difficult to remember the truth. Judge Judy watched it in bed with my grandma. If you're going to be a liar, you better have a good memory. And it turns out none of you guys have a good memory. The person that had the photographic memory is dead. That was Charlie Kirk.
Wow.
Okay. That was your boy wonder, and you've now lost him.
Dang.
Speaking of inconsistencies, for example, last week I told you that in working on this investigation, the theme of sex trafficking, it's coming up too much. Child sex trafficking in particular. And so I was interested in Erica having said that while she was quote unquote living in China, she was working with victims of sex trafficking. Okay. I want you to remember what she said. Take a listen.
I decided to create something called Everyday Heroes Like You, where we're able to, originally, it was focused on bringing funds and awareness to various grassroots organizations that were in specific communities that would be able to have volunteers that are transparent with their funds, that are actually doing what they're saying they're doing, instead of just having 70% of the funds go to admin and only 30% towards the cause. It kind of grew into something more global. I was living in China and doing a lot of work with the victims from sex trafficking, and then began to phase that into working with the Marine Corps and the Army, and then was able to work with a orphanage in Romania to help sustain them during their winter seasons, and giving them more clothing items or tangible items rather than just money.
Then I told you guys that having asked this question through an official channel, Turning Point USA, I received a response alleging that Erica never lives there. So that's coming from Erica. She actually never lived there. They said that she simply visited for 2 weeks,
All right.
you know, like a tourist, just to visit the Great Wall and perhaps see other monuments in history. Then somebody emailed me an interesting video of Charlie Kirk. And apparently he disagrees with that new assessment. This is a video of Charlie debating someone named Ben Carollo. Take a listen.
When you go to China, let me just tell you, you'll drive down the street and you will see dead people laying in the middle of the street. You will see people defecating. You
Go
will
to
see...
China then. Go to China. Take a video.
Actually,
Bring
you know
these
what?
Cameras.
My-
go to China. Take a
unlike
video
you-
with these cameras. I
unlike
dare
you-
right now. Go
Unlike
to do
you,
it.
my wife lived in China for 6 months, and she'll show you the videos. She'll show you the images. They don't have a regard for human life. They don't value people as the individual.
What's going on here? Okay, will the real Erica Kirk please stand up? Okay, because this isn't, you can't say you lived there, but say you didn't live there or there for a trip, and now you've got your husband.
Well, wait. Erica said she lived there. Charlie said she lived there. If they're saying that she was only there for 2 years, does that mean that, I'm sorry, for 2 weeks, does that mean that they're wrong? Or does that mean that they might not have the full story? What are we doing here? This is embarrassing that Candace thinks these are. Candace, what are we doing? What are we doing today? What are we honestly doing?
Saying my wife lived there. So he clearly thought you lived there. You thought you lived there. And then somehow now you don't want to live there. And the reason I think is because after doing a little bit of digging, I saw on a real estate profile that you said that it was the charity Everyday Heroes. So that would check out because that's what you were doing with that charity. And that's what you said in the interview that was affiliated, or adjacent work that you were doing for Everyday Heroes in China. I would still like to know more about that. So since our official answer from Turning Point USA is that she was only there visiting, and yet we have her and Charlie on record saying that she was living there, I would like to know specifically what charity in China she was working with. And I'm sure, even though I know people in China don't have access to YouTube, I do know that they're somehow watching my show. If you know more about that, what they were doing, what charity they were working on, I would like to know. More tips at CandaceOwens.com. Like I said, I'm working on this Erica Kirk timeline, and I want everything to be legit, and there's a lot of information out there. There is a lot of.
You mean legit like you just did with the cattle ranchers? You mean legit like you did with Mitch or Egyptian planes or red cranes, fill in the blank. Like you do a fantastic job, Candace. You just keep it up. Go ahead, girl. Slay queen.
Information out
Slay.
there, a lot of correct information
Stunning
out
and
there.
brave.
I want to pull it all together. So more tips at CandaceOwens.com. When was she in China? What specific charity was she working with that was helping victims of sex trafficking? Anyway, in other news, great news, Operation Mocking Pastor is back. I thought maybe we're going to leave that behind 2025. No,
Wow.
especially not when it comes to the Cornerstone Church. Remember, that was the church where we had the pastor get on stage and call me Cameras Owens and
There it
Tucker
is.
Carlson when they get their talking points. And it looks like they got it's renewed, it's been refreshed. And this time, Cornerstone Church, different location, is also going to have a feature from our boy, Mr. Rob McCoy. Take a listen.
Hey everybody, Pastor Gary Hamrick here from Cornerstone Chapel, inviting you to a special Wednesday night service, January the 21st, where we're going to talk about anti-Semitism. It's on the rise in churches and in conservative politics. Consider Candace Owens, Tucker Carlson. We'll talk about them too. I'll have special guests with me, Pastor Rob McCoy, the leader of Turning Point Faith, Samuel Smadja from Israel, an Israeli businessman. So join us on Wednesday, January the 21st.
The Israeli
See you then.
businessman. Not the Israeli businessman. Look, it is an Israeli business. Operation Mocking Pastor is an Israeli business. So I respect that. That's straightforward and it's honest. And so I hope you guys could go, and it's going to be riveting. Maybe somebody could ask him a question about why he's trying to rehabilitate people that went to prison for harming children. Might be more relevant than me saying that, mass murdering Palestinians is wrong. I feel like that's more relevant. but maybe it's not, because anti-Semitism is now noticing, right? Noticing what we're doing down in Argentina, noticing what we're doing over in Gaza, and not getting into line and letting us get away with it. So it should be riveting. Again, don't know how people are attending these churches, other than thinking of it as stand-up comedy, because that is a good reason. We all need to laugh. We all need to let loose. It's been, last year was a tough year. And if you're looking for comedy,
What are you
Rob
talking
McCoy
about?
and the Cornerstone Church can provide that. So thank you guys. Also, and just the topic of shamelessness. I don't know if we pulled this, Skylar. If not, it's cool because I can bump it to tomorrow. Did we see the Fox News thing? Do you have that?
So it's bad that again, I'm not, you don't have to do everything, all things Israel. My church doesn't do that at all. But because they're addressing a topic, that makes it bad that they're just doing it. I wonder if they do anything else. It just, man, this woman is exhausting. I don't know how y'all put up with her, man.
Like, they were basically promoting that Israel is giving Charlie an award for fighting anti-Semitism, like the country of Israel. Yeah, do you want to pull that up? This is just, it's so shameless. Israel will honor the late Charlie Kirk with an award for opposing anti-Semitism. They're not going to stop. They're like, this ghost belongs to us. This belongs to us. And it just makes you feel like they killed him. I don't know. They're just trying and doing too much. And you guys are going to love the fact that I have another text message.
Oh, we
that I'm
don't.
going to reveal to you.
We really
Sent to
don't.
Charlie Kirk, another, I would say, laced threat from
We
one
don't.
of his donors. I've got a lot more information coming because apparently, hilariously, Turning Point USA purged a bunch of their employees that they thought were giving me information, and they weren't.
Oh, good.
So now they're giving me information. So it's
Well, there you go.
an amazing week. Tomorrow, though, we are going to have a joint show. My guest is going to be Baron Coleman. You guys have been asking for us to get together, and we are, because we both received a tip that is just, it's mind-blowing, actually. And I was like, look, you should just come on the show on Tuesday. Let's sit down and go through this and unpack it, because I think people are just going to go, what is going on in America? What is going on in the world? And yeah, anyways, we're going to have a very exciting show. Let's take a brief break and throw it to some sponsors.
Let me
it's pretty
ask you a
obvious that
question
there is-
in the chat, for real. In the chat, we can be honest. It's just a few of us here, just 812 of us. Real quick, do y'all really care about this? I don't care one bit. I really don't. I really don't. I think Candace is that nothing here was necessary. And I feel like I'm wasting y'all's time. In the chat, real quick, I want to bring back on Chad and Delano. We can finish letting them chop it up. I think that was a much better, much more edifying conversation. I'm done. I'm not trying to be mean about it, but what did we just hear? Like, she's just throwing out speculations. I think this is something wrong, and this is just par for her course. So Greenheart's in the chat if y'all want to go back and watch Chad and Delano Squires discussing MLK and his legacy. I think that's much more edifying, but I could be wrong. I want to make sure I'm listening to the audience. I hear what y'all talking about. In the meantime, I do want to say thank you so much for the very kind super right here. Thank you so much, Tammy, with the 2. Imagine how his poor parents feel. Like, she's just putting people's whole lives out there without any regard, man. It's sick to think about. When you think about it, she just put that whole school, just name that school out there for no reason. That's where Charlie Kirk went. Maybe he did go there. Maybe he didn't go there. We know for good and fact, nobody there is probably knows anything about Charlie Kirk now, but I bet you they're getting phone calls and emails. Susan, thank you so much for the very kind $5 super. No question, no comment, just pure love of the game. Y'all want to go ahead. Yeah. Oh, and Charlie's parents, I can only imagine what Charlie's parents are feeling like, seeing and hearing this type of foolishness. Yeah, you know what? I'm going to go ahead. We're going to go ahead and jump back over to Delano and Chad. I think that's a much better conversation. You all were really tapped in on it. So I appreciate these guys. Again, if you're not familiar, Delano Squires and Chad Jackson were having a debate about the legacy of MLK on Jason Whitlock's channel. It was a good conversation. I want to bring it in, let y'all finish it up. We're a little bit less than halfway through. So we got a little bit of ways to go. So I'm gonna bring it back in. I think I sped it up a little bit as well. Yeah, we're done with Candace. Candace is not even talking about anything encouraging. Like, let's keep it going. Let's roll.
Black Christians who could see what he was doing and the phoniness and the fraudulence of what he was doing. And they were being outspoken. Is it Joseph Johnson? Is it
Jackson?
Joseph Jackson? And they were being critical, and they were silenced and ignored, no different than Black conservatives like us. The mainstream media, we sit there and say, hey, no, man, go to graduate high school, get married, have kids, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
And we get ignored, and we can only get on platforms in certain places.
Right.
And that's what happened to Joseph Jackson. And a lot of people, they could see like, no, man, I've heard the stories about King and these hoes. I know who he's running around with. I know what they could see through in real time. And these people were ignored and silenced. And the actual communists, the leftists or whatever, their narrative won out over Dr. King. The only reason why I jump in here is because I know that it's a debate, and so there are tactics you use during the debate, but the standard of evidence in the court of law, whether criminal or civil, the standard isn't, well, it's not evidence unless OJ comes out and says, I killed Nicole Brown. We can ignore everything else. We never have him on.
Forensic evidence, eyewitness. There's more to evidence than just a person stating something. So to answer your question, I think
that's the standard you're holding Chad to. He's offering up other evidence.
Well, I'll just say this real quick. It'll take me 30 seconds. So again, according to documented records, the Soviet Union saw the civil rights in America and treated it as what they called a strategic propaganda asset. The same USSR, by way of its intelligence assets, were in constant communication with the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, which King was the president of. Now, the reason why those words, strategic propaganda asset, are important is because of that strategy piece. So you just said earlier that, oh, he's trying to make it to where Black Americans aren't second-class citizenship or second-class citizens and things of this nature. Again, all strategy. And the issue was never the issue. The issue is the revolution. This is one of the slogans that they use. In other words, you saw incremental success on the part of Blacks, again, well documented by Sowell, Walter E. Williams, and others, from the turn of the 20th century, going into the middle part of the 20th century. These things were actually happening. What did King say in I Have a Dream speech? Now is the time. Now is the time. Now is the time. Basically repeating this mantra of kind of revolution. Now is the time. We're done waiting. We're not going to be patient anymore. He's pushing this kind of revolutionary language of now is the time. Again, when you look at the connection from the USSR to the SELC to the front man who's using and exploiting this particular grievance that is already being handled, but he's exploiting this particular grievance. It's not for what we think or what we're taught it is, that all the races will come together, the skies will open up, rainbows and butterflies. That's not what it was. What it was a strategic kind of component to get to the next phase. King said, after the success of the 1963 for Civil Rights Act and the 1965 Voting Rights Act, he said, it's now time to focus on the economic issue. He said he called it an issue. It's now time to focus on the economic issue.
Okay.
And he's moving into this kind of, again, incremental, slow kind of burn, slow phase of moving us more and more closer to socialism. That was his ultimate goal, Delano. And again, it's well documented in his writings. It's well documented in a lot of the things that he was doing over the course of the late 50s, early 60s, and into the late 60s.
Let me move on. Third question. And this is another doozy. How important to his legacy is Dr. King's moral failure, the playing around with women and all of that, that's all been addressed here recently and brought out over the last 20, 30 years. Delano first. 3 minutes here.
Sure. I mean, I certainly do think it's important because for many people, especially older generations, they see King as equal rights, sort of civil rights activist and moral leader. So when you hear that someone who you idolize had serious moral failings, and I certainly would put adultery in that category, I do think it taints the legacy a great deal. But I would say, generally speaking, most people see King more in his social role than his theological role. King is not like regarded. I mean, to some extent, I certainly have seen how the Black church has sort of moved from which I would call the social gospel. Eventually, you have sort of liberation theology, and that certainly has been a deviation from biblical orthodoxy. But generally speaking, I think people see King as a social leader. And I will say this.
I don't think you can just go ahead and just kind of speed past that. That social gospel, that liberation theology is a huge, huge problem that I don't think you can just kind of slip past and like, oh, well, we'll just slide past it. Delano, I don't think you should do that, sir. Okay, let's go.
For some people, they'll say, you know what? I think his moral failings are a knock against him. Some people will say, but it proves that you don't have to be a perfect human being to do things that for positive good. I would argue if the leading preacher, right, and we can put preacher in quotation marks, in America, in let's say from 1972 to 2022, right, preaching against abortion, was a man who has some funny theology. And oftentimes with funny theology comes personal failings. If that preacher was the person most responsible for getting Roe versus Wade overturned, conservatives will find a way to honor that person in public. So the notion that
let me tell you why I know you're right. Scott Adams just took a dump on Christianity and died, and no conservatives shouted and screamed. Go ahead.
So the notion, and again, part of why I like being able to sit down and talk to Chad face to face, because part of what I'm doing is not necessarily hitting on particular points, it's truing up the scales. The notion that the only people worthy of public honor are ones who have spotless moral records means that there will be few people who are going to be worthy of public honor.
The issue is not, no. See, I like Delano, but the issue is not that. God can use whomever. God can use whomever he wants. He can draw a straight line with a crooked stick. And we look at our brothers and sisters here on this earth, and we look at them in reference to who they are, that they are humans, that they are flawed, and they're gonna mess up. So whether or not it's MLK and what he did for this issue, or this person for what he did for that issue, and so on and so forth, we recognize that they're in the hands of God, and God used those people to steer this conversation in a certain way, or steer this culture in a certain way to his honor and to his glory. So whether or not we honor them is really a moot point. Whether or not you exalt them doesn't matter. What matters ultimately is whether or not Christ is glorified. Let's go ahead and finish up. Let's go.
If you're a person, I'm just going to give you a time frame over the last 30 years who's voted for a presidential candidate, I'm not even going to say who is on record of being accused of cheating on his wife, and you'll say, no, that's my guy. Then you have to keep the same standard, equal weights and measures. So while I believe that King's moral failings do taint his legacy, I would argue that holding him to a standard that no other public leader is held to is quite unfair. So I'm not sure if I got any more time left.
Yeah,
but
you do. Because what I want you to clarify, because I think you probably have an answer, is King and other people, that ministers should be held to a different standard than even presidents.
They could be held to a different standard. Some people would say you hold the president to a higher standard than you hold
Who says that?
Some people would say that.
No, I get some people, but I'm talking about among us three.
I wouldn't. But then again, but if you say King is a fake Christian, then you could treat him like a pagan, like anybody else.
But the Bible says these fake ministers, they're gonna face a special.
The fake ministers and the do-gooder non-believers gonna face the same end. What I'm saying is you can't hold up King as a minister when you want to smack him for his moral failings, and then cast him as a pagan when you want to dismiss him as a moral leader. You have to choose one particular lane. That's what I'm saying.
No, hold on.
So again, my point is the idea that you can only celebrate people who have spotless moral records means that Mount Rushmore is going to be clear. I'm not talking about the literal, but whoever our Mount Rushmore of social, cultural goats is probably going to be cleared off.
How important to his legacy is his moral failure?
I think it's pretty important for the very reason that his official title was that of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.
Facts.
So regardless of how much influence people believe that he had across the globe as it pertains to race relations, so on and so forth, whether we want to use semantics and call him a social leader, the reality is he's the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.
That's what they call
who
him.
got his training in theology and who occupied the role of that of a pastor at originally Dexter Avenue Baptist Church there in Montgomery, Alabama. And then he would die the associate pastor at Ebenezer Baptist Church. And so, we read in the scriptures that, those who profess to be teachers will be judged more harshly. We read about what the qualifications of being a teacher, a preacher of the gospel are, or an elder in the church are. And the fact of the matter is King did not meet that standard at all, and nor did was he trying to. I mean, King was very sexually loose, and I say that not to be controversial or sensational, but he was. His attorney, his lawyer, Clarence B. Jones, would routinely send women to King's room whenever they would travel and go on tour and give all these speeches. That coincides with what the communists called bedroom politics. Bedroom politics, pillow politics, something like that. But when you see the fact that, I mean, there were rumors that were circulating within civil rights circles about King having sex with Bayard Rustin, as well as Ralph Abernathy. In fact, Adam Clayton Powell Jr. threatened King that he's going to use that information against him if he protested the 1960 Democratic National Convention. And King instantly stepped down. And he, for a moment, separated himself from Bayard Rustin, only to reconnect for the 1963 March on Washington. Now, you mean to tell me that somebody who faced down dogs and hoses and all the things, he stood up to that, but when it came to this threat, all of a sudden, let me try to distance myself from that real quick. So for me, it's like, I'm not saying that King did it. I'm not saying that King was having sex with men. I'm just saying that these were rumors that were circulating in civil rights circles. However, the orgies and the extramarital affairs with other women, that is well documented. And I do think that is something that should be considered. And as far as people like to say, well, David, King David sinned. Well, David was a repentant man. I mean, we have psalm after psalm after psalm of David repenting of what he did. We don't have any such record of King having repented. In fact, he slept with two women who weren't his wife the night before he died. So
I'm not sure if there's a lot of rebuttal here as much as we can just go back and forth, or maybe you do want to rebut, Delano, or
no, I mean, it's interesting because, again, one of my critiques is not just on the substance of what Chad says, because, again, much of it I will concede just for the sake of argument. I don't have all the history books in front of me, but part of it is the process. So I've brought up guilt by association. I've brought up the use of language to sort of condition the emotions, right? Whether that's the term Marxist or using terms, like nefarious or saying that someone, one of my favorite, Chad didn't say this today because we didn't go so far back, is when Chad said that Abraham Lincoln was infatuated with Karl Marx. So, man, that's a strong term to use for somebody. But now we get into rumor, and it's drop the rumor, expound on it, and then say, well, I'm not necessarily saying it happened. I'm just saying that that's what people were saying.
You're talking about the gay stuff.
Correct, the gay stuff. So it's one of those things where it's just, again, I get where Chad is going in terms of the ultimate verdict. The process of getting there is one of my issues. But again, I'm not making the argument that Dr. King, and I think most people, generally speaking, when they refer to him, they will call him Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Some things was put in the reverend part, but in many respects, I think it's probably appropriate that part has fallen off over the course of years. But I go back to my other point, which is
doctor of what though?
Right.
You said that the reverend part has fallen off, but I mean the doctor isn't in a secular study, is it?
Is in theology?
Yeah.
Okay.
And also, nobody's going to ever let you get away and say, well, he's just Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and they're going to say, well, he was a pastor of a church. He was this, that, and the third. He was a reverend. So even if the name doesn't, even if the title Reverend isn't attached to his name and they just call him Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., it only take 1 or 2 questions before Reverend gets inserted into it. That's just something to think about. Let's go.
No, most people, look, there's so many people with doctors behind it. Dr. Joe Biden. I mean, nobody, they're not even checking. The Reverend holds much more of a weight when it comes to religious matters than the doctor part. But what I'm saying, going back to my argument is, again, if the standard is clean moral record in order to be held up in esteem, then that's something that we have to hold across the board. Can I ask Chad a quick question?
Yeah,
Chad, do you believe that a person who writes about the virtue of liberty while holding slaves, one, is inconsistent in their practice, and two, immoral in their behavior?
Ask that one more time. I'm sorry.
Do you believe that someone who writes about the virtues
I don't believe that they're immoral. I don't believe that they're inconsistent.
So you don't believe owning people is necessarily immoral, particularly when you write about the virtue of freedom and liberty?
Well, I mean, when you look at the fact that, and that leads to a very complex and nuanced conversation that I don't think we have the time right now to get into, but since you asked it, when you look at the question of what is and what isn't a citizen, I think that, and then too, when you look at slavery, biblically speaking,
not biblically, in America. Let's get the time frame right, because biblically they weren't writing about liberty in that sense. So let's say an American historical figure who writes about the virtues of liberty, but owns slaves. Do you think that person is being inconsistent?
I think it depends on the question,
so.
Delano. I think that's why it's tough for me to answer the question.
Because
the fact of the matter is, I'm not ready to concede this idea that having a slave is a completely immoral thing to do or to have. I don't believe that.
Or liberty,
whether it's in America or whether it's somewhere in Egypt or
Why do you
Jerusalem.
say that?
Because I don't think that there's any biblical evidence of the simple owning of a slave as being a sinful thing. I haven't seen any biblical evidence of that.
I mean, man stealing was met with the death penalty.
Well, now you're saying man stealing. Are we talking about slavery or are we talking about man stealing?
Right.
I mean, that's those two things are certainly in the same family.
No, because I know exactly what. And before you get in your feelings, Chad is saying like the idea of somebody selling themselves into slavery, like I'm going to become your servant because I'm broke or something of that nature. That's where Chad is going. Now, not saying the stealing of a person, that is a problem, hands down. Chad is not saying that. He's talking about the other variations, or that's where he's going. So I just want to make that clear.
I could say, in the same way, I could say communism and wealth distribution are in the same family. I mean, I could say
Thomas Jefferson stole men.
If he didn't steal them, he bought them. Once were stolen.
Okay.
So if you want to parse it that way.
So buying a slave is sinful?
I think when you're a person who writes about liberty while practicing slavery, there is a vast disparity between your creeds and your deeds.
Buying a slave is not sinful. This is news to me.
I'm asking a question.
I'm asking you.
Yeah, I haven't seen any evidence that it is.
Oh.
I haven't seen any evidence that it is. Again, I understand how provocative that may sound, and I'm not trying to be provocative.
No,
I'm
I
not
know
trying to be
you're
controversial. I just don't believe. Like the thing is, one of the things that a lot of people really kind of hang over America's head to this very day is this quote unquote sin of slavery. And
why you say quote unquote when you say sin of slavery?
Well,
you don't think it was a sin.
I say quote unquote because of the overuse.
Okay.
So that's what I mean by that. So and it's weaponized and it's used time and again as fodder for a political agenda. And so for me, when Delano takes it back to the founding fathers and he asks the question, and pardon me if I'm misrepresenting your question, but as I understood it, Is it wrong or is it sinful to be writing about slavery or freedom and liberty while you are the owner of slaves? Is it okay?
I didn't say wrong or sinful. I said is, I can't remember the exact way I put it in when I framed it originally, but is it I might have used the word disconnect. Like, is there a disconnect there? Or is
there a disconnect?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, when you look at the
critical, is that what you mean?
Yeah. I might. That's what.
When you look at the Sivas, when you look at the citizen, like which again goes back to Aristotle, Plato, the question of what is a citizen, right? If a slave is not considered a citizen of a specific nation or whatever the case may be, that doesn't give you the right to mistreat them. You know what I mean? Mistreat somebody who is your slave or your indentured servant or who's in your care or whatever the case may be. So I'm not advocating for that by any stretch of the imagination.
But it gives you the right to own them.
Frankly, I mean, there was, so we live downstream of this kind of post-war consensus where, and I see you laughing, but
I see it used all the time on X by Christian pastors, post-war.
Yeah.
Well, go ahead.
But yeah, this post-war consensus, this new idea of this new world where we believe that we're more moral than our predecessors.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh.
So I don't understand what that reaction was.
Yeah, I don't either.
Because I take much of what your project is taking Chad Jackson's 2025 values and teleporting them back into the 1960s.
No, not so fast.
Okay.
I mean, Jason said it himself. He put out the name Joseph H. Jackson, and it wasn't just Joseph H. Jackson. It was George Schuyler. It was Julia Brown. It was Manning Johnson. On and on I can go. I mean, even Bob Woodson left the civil rights. He's still alive with us today. I think he lives up there where you live.
Right.
Even he left the civil rights movement when he saw what they were up to.
He's not a critic of King, and I know that. I know he's not a critic of King.
Well, even
in the way that you are.
Be that as it may,
okay.
The reason why he left the movement was because of what it was doing and what King himself was doing. Even though Woodson may not be calling King out by name or criticizing him in particular, the reasons he left the movement, as he gives them in terms of the forced integration piece, is exactly what King was doing. So whether he's calling him out by name, it's a non-factor. But the reality of it is there were people who called him out by name. And these were Black people who lived in this time that you're speaking of. And so, yes, I have the curse of having been born in 1990, but does that disqualify my voice? Not so much, because again, we do live in the information age. We have access to information. We have access, I mean, King, again, all the King papers. I have all the hard copies, but you can find a lot of it on the Stanford website. You were talking about earlier about the private conversations. Well, shouldn't there be in the private conversations King saying the quiet part out loud? Well, we don't have access to all of those private conversations. In fact, the task force, the church committee in 1976, who issued their report, they even said that they were only able to listen to the beginning, the middle, and the end of hours-long tapes. And so they didn't even have access to that. So,
so they could get the orgies, but they don't have them on record as arguing for some of the things that a Marxist would argue for. But
the point, Delano, is that we can't say, oh, because you're a young man who didn't live during that time, you don't have the right to speak on this subject, which is not what you're saying. But it can very quickly become that argument, because the reality is there were people at the time who were speaking against it, who were being suppressed. These were Black people.
Agreed.
And I'm speaking in the 21st century as somebody who has access to the information and to the records. And then too, not just looking at King and the civil rights movement, but looking at the way communism was permeating in those days during the Cold War period. All of these things, all of these parts of the puzzle are worth taking into consideration, instead of just taking King at face value from something that he said in the speech, which, by the way, was not written by him, right? Which was written by people who, guess what? Were part of the Communist Party at some capacity, or in a given era. For Bayard Rustin's case, it was in his youth, and so when you look at that and set that aside over here, to get back to the matter at hand about the whole slavery piece, yes, like we, by way of this kind of new kind of progressive era thought process, like that. this thought process that many of us has been ushered in by way of the progressive era in the early 1920s, which takes something like slavery, which again, I understand how what I'm saying right now in the 21st century, it's really tough to say because it's not a very popular thing, but slavery on its face is not automatically a bad thing. And that has been the case for the overwhelming majority of human history. The rhetoric around it has changed. A lot of the ideas around it have changed such to where now you hear the word slave and it automatically equates to just an atrocity and all the things. And so for me, as somebody who is a student of history, I have to look at everything kind of holistically and not just completely lump myself into this.
But let me push back real quick on something you said just now, because you talked about the fact that in King's day there were Black leaders who were opposed to him. I grant that. There were also Black ministers. I saw a wonderful conversation between Condoleezza Rice, Freeman Hrabowski, and a woman named Mary Bush on Uncommon Knowledge with Peter Robinson a number of months ago, where they talked about growing up in Alabama in the 1960s. Condoleezza Rice went to school with the four little girls who were killed in the 16th Street church bombing, and her father was a Presbyterian minister.
Shout out to Presbys.
Freeman Hrabowski sort of marched with the youth march when Dr. King came. So there were also people in favor of it. But with that said, I could say the same thing about sort of early American history and slavery. The idea that slavery was seen as a moral evil is not the function of the 1920s or post-World War II consensus.
Sure I follow your point.
My point is this: in the same way you can say when King was operating, there were people opposed to him, I could say when slaveholders and slavery was in operation and was seen as normal, there were abolitionists. From the inception of slavery in this country, there have been abolitionists. Yeah. So the notion that came about in the 1920s and we're reading modern values back into that time is one that I think can be thrown out completely. There were always people opposed to slavery. And my question to you is someone who writes about the virtue of liberty while holding slaves, can they be charged as a hypocrite? If your answer is no, then we can settle it there. My answer would be yes. That doesn't mean that I don't think Thomas Jefferson is worthy of public honor. That means he's a complicated figure, and those complications are baked into the cake. But when it comes to King and people in the civil rights era and Black leaders who were sympathetic to him, it seems to be communism is the one unforgivable sin. So slavery we can forgive because people, have practiced it and so on and so forth.
Your analogy falls apart.
How so?
Because for reasons that I just expressed, and admittedly, I don't think I did as great of a job expressing them. But again, for the better part of human history, slavery existed. It wasn't automatically seen as just this terrible, atrocious thing. And so if Jefferson, you have to consider that on the one hand, and then on the other hand, you have to consider the fact of the question of what is a citizen?
Why do I have to consider that? The citizen Trump made in the image of God?
It doesn't.
Okay, so why do I have to consider whether somebody's a citizen?
Because the question of who is and who isn't a citizen is the thing to be considered when one considers the purchasing of land, who gets to vote, things of this nature.
And purchasing of people. I want to press this. And the purchasing of people. Is citizenship the marker by which we say that person can be purchased and that other person cannot?
Yes.
Really?
Let me see if I can jump in here, because where I think this falls apart from even when I heard the original question. I think what he's saying, Delano, is in 1765.
Right.
Thomas Jefferson's around and he's writing about freedom and whatever. He owned slaves. He's doing it during a time where everybody or a large majority of people thought, hey, slavery's kind of normal. It's global. It's everywhere. And so he's not thinking he's doing anything wrong. And where this analogy started was from the question about King's moral failures. And so if Martin Luther King existed during a time where all ministers thought it was kind of normal to be banging women on the sides and committing adultery and blah, 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 then it would be like, yeah, he's acting just like Thomas Jefferson and those guys, when it was very normal for people around, rich people to own slaves and blah, blah, blah. But for a minister, it's been a long time, I think, since anyone, or maybe never, that everyone thought, hey man, you could be banging this girl and that girl, be married, do this, have parties, hang around with gay people and with people that are practicing a worldview Marxism that's completely hostile to Christianity. That's Martin Luther King was doing wrong and talking right when everybody knew, and there was consensus agreement, like, man, sleeping around on your wife and all that, and when you're a minister and you're blah, blah, blah. Thomas Jefferson's writing about freedom during a time where most people thought it's not that big of a deal owning slaves. It's a global phenomenon, and we're actually the leaders of correcting this global phenomenon. Europeans, again, there's still slavery all in the world today, and again,
which shouldn't be a problem.
What?
No.
That's according to him.
Right.
No, it's a very explosive point.
Right.
What you're saying, but it's also a distraction because
I disagree with Delano. No, I think Jason did a good job of explaining it. Good job. I wish Chad had explained it, but no. Are these people, again, we're not talking about somebody who sold themselves into slavery because they're in a debt or they're broke themselves and there's no other way to get around it. No, their man's stealing has happened in order for them to be on the slave market. Delano, you know that though. He knows that. All right, let's go.
Again, it's like, hey, he's the crazy guy that thinks slavery. No. I'm talking about the way it's been interpreted. I'm not saying the way you're arguing it.
Okay.
But yes, we can focus on his unique thought, which I had never heard until today. But now when I think about it and I go, oh, I might have to go back into this Bible and look deeper and wonder why. I wonder why the Bible wasn't more outspoken against slavery if it's this big, horrible thing. So he's opened my mind. I don't know where I'm going to land on this, but it's like I'm going to go to the Bible because if it was this bad and this unforgivable, I think God would have spoke against it.
I mean, this New Testament scripture on slavery. There's an entire book.
Well, the treatment
on the Apostle Paul talking to a man who owned a slave, who ran away, who Paul wanted that man to accept as a brother in Christ. But I take your point about adultery, Jason. But let me switch the charge, because the main charge that Chad levels against Dr. King is not that he's adulterous, right?
In this part of the conversation,
in terms of moral, we're talking about moral failings, but even in your recounting it, part of it is the Marxism. And if the argument
that what in this segment of the deal, when we were talking, now, I'll let you go there.
Okay.
Because it's right. You're right. Overall, that's part of his moral failure.
Okay.
But what we were talking about here, basically,
I'd say
Chad
it's
went on a long
biblical
dissertation about him maybe banging men, certainly sleeping around on his wife, and all that other stuff. Chad was talking about the sex part.
Right.
During this, when we opened up the question. Now, you want to bring Marxism into it, go ahead.
Right.
But you're taking Chad a bit out of context in terms of what we've been talking about the last 15 minutes. But
I'm sure Chad would say that promotion of Marxism in and of itself is a moral failing for a minister.
That's
I don't
correct.
have any problem. Okay. Well, so we stipulate that. But what I'm saying is, if the argument is also that Marxism was commonplace in America, far more commonplace than we understand, right? Then I can make the same argument. Oh, this is something that's common. So he's not really all that different. And I reject both of those arguments. The notion that something is more or less moral because a bunch of people do it. I mean, again,
I wasn't putting a morality scale.
No, I'm speaking to Chad's argument, and I'm bringing it up because I didn't just drop this as some gotcha. I said part of what I'm doing is to true up the scales, and if the argument is when we see a vast difference between a man's creeds and his deeds, that in and of itself is sufficient to dethrone him from public honor. I'm just asking Chad whether he holds that position consistently. And I respect Chad's response, which is, I don't really see slaveholding as something on the level of I don't see owning slaves on the same level as advocating Marxism. Would you agree to that particular characterization of your views?
And I would have to amen and agree with that.
Okay, real quick. I don't think Jason Whitlock needs to be in the argument, but I think they need to go ahead and identify what do they mean by these terms, because slave doesn't mean the same thing all the time, especially in the scriptures. It doesn't mean the same thing. So I think they need to clarify that, or they need to get back on track, which is MLK and his life rather than anything else. Let's go.
Okay.
Marxism is going to cost you your salvation.
Okay.
And that whole ideology is going to cost you your salvation. Chad is arguing, I'm not so sure if slavery is going to do it. And you might get shocked when you get to heaven and see Thomas Jefferson and somebody else up there with you. That's his argument. And again, I'm going to have to go to the Bible. I don't know what I think, but that's his argument.
Well, I mean, and thank you, Jason. I think you, I'm seeing now as a debater, I need to find a quicker way to kind of get to my points. But at the same time, there is something to be said about, again, this long kind of lost component or portion of history where the argument over who is and who isn't a citizen was something that was considered, once again, in ancient Greece and even the French Revolution, and even during our own kind of coming up with our Constitution. And so, no, I don't really think it was hypocritical for Thomas Jefferson to have slaves and while at the same time writing about liberty and justice, especially, I mean, sure, there's rumors around him having raped one of his, I don't know if you're familiar with this.
Sally Hemings.
Yeah.
I was going to bring it up, but you did. So I'll.
Yeah. So of course there's rumors of that. And then of course there's rumors there's rebuttals to those rumors. But the reality of it is, again, I'm not somebody who even holds the founding fathers to a kind of deity kind of platform.
Right.
I'm someone who believes that we are to worship God, not man. I am grateful for the fact that
that's where, Chad is
when
my
you look
dude
at all of the
regard.
things that they were up against in terms of coming up with our federal constitution.
Real quick. Chad and Chad is consistent. He and I have talked about this, and we both hold the same position. We don't pedestalize people that God uses. We recognize that you are a tool in the hand of God, and God can use, again, a crooked stick to draw a straight line. So Chad is very consistent with that. I do think he needed to make that very clear, because I think that would have done away with a lot of this discussion about, some of the side quest conversations, just by saying, look, I don't venerate anybody. I don't venerate anybody. I don't. So let's keep it going. But by the way, this is Chad Jackson and Delano Squires. They had a debate about MLK's legacy on the Jason Whitlock show earlier today. I thought it was super informative. I thought it was going to be super informative, and it hasn't let me down. I'm dropping a link to it in the chat if you want to catch the full thing again. Definitely let them know that we sent you. I appreciate y'all tapping in. Thank you so much. Let's get it back in. Let's go.
I tend to be more aligned with the anti-federalists. Again, Patrick Henry's, your Luther Martin's, your Robert Yates and others who believed in a small government. And so what communism does is it comes along and not only does it want to expand government, but it also wants to really push the communist ideology. I mean, as you read in the Communist Manifesto, Marx writes about how the communists basically team up with any party or any platform across the country so long as they can push their agenda. Vladimir Lenin writes about the same thing. Joseph Stalin even writes about this. And so this is Mao in his red book. This is what they do. And so, like, for me, like, I understand that you have very rigid and very, dare I say, academic kind of semantic, like, well, if it doesn't really fit perfectly into this box, then it just doesn't really hold weight when it comes to whether King was a Marxist or whether he was a communist or whatever the case may be. But what I'm simply saying is, even though we don't have King on the record saying, I am a communist, I want to destroy America, we have to look at all these other things that were going on with him and around him in order to make it this kind of deductive conclusion of what it was the civil rights movement was actually about. And it wasn't about making America better. It wasn't about liberating the Negro. It wasn't about advancing the gospel. It wasn't about any of those things. It was about the adding the extra S to the USA, quite frankly.
So, can I respond? So one, I think you and I could both agree that neither of us is arguing to deify anyone, right? So this is not, I'm not asking whether or not you hold Jefferson up as a god, as a demigod. I'm using the term public honor, So this is the ability to
So
offer.
let me real quick, because I'm not really 100% certain where Delano's going, and I think he might have missed what Chad is saying. And again, I think Chad could fine tune this and maybe get out of the ethereal and get to some very concrete. Why was MLK honored by the Margaret Sanger Association and the for her Negro Project? Why did he receive the Margaret Sanger Award? Like, what was that? Why was that? If he was about these things, why was that the thing? That's what I really want. Maybe he needs to get down to like one particular topic and kind of drill down into that topic. I think that would help out a lot. But anyway, shout out to him. Let's go.
Praise and respect for someone who, despite their flaws and imperfections, did something that was primarily for the public good, right? For the general good.
Great question.
And again, I'm trying to press in on this because you keep going back to this issue of citizenship. And I heard you say, okay, the citizenship Trump being made in the image of God, and you said no. And on that, I would agree. But again, whether the African was a citizen or not, he was a man. He was a person made in the image of God. And if what the Marxist says is, no, we want to steal the fruits of your hard-earned labor, and we say that is a sin that we should condemn. Okay, yay and amen. But if the slaveholder is saying, I want to take your body.
See, that's the problem.
And yeah, it's great if you got a nice little family, you got a wife and you got your kids. Who cares? You're coming with me. And in fact, actually, she's coming with me. And because I own her, she's my property. This is what slavery is.
So that's the problem. Delano, I hate to say it, but there are multiple definitions of slavery in the Bible, or slave in the Bible. Delano's only looking at the man-stealing example, the chattel slavery, which again is a horrible thing. And Chad would speak against that. The problem is Chad is thinking about the other definitions as well as man stealing. Delano is only talking about man stealing. That's the problem. I just figured it out.
I can do with her what I want. And then I'll go to worship at church on Sunday. So the notion that we say, well, this was commonplace in the world, so you can't condemn it. And really, the sin was federal overreach. Nah, I'm sorry. That doesn't hold up. And that's why I'm like, you keep going back to citizenship, because I could just ask a simple question. If an American today goes somewhere, right, or has someone who has been on the losing end of sectarian conflict in their home country, and that person is brought here, an American today purchases this person, owns them, and can do with them what they want, would you argue that that is moral, since the person being purchased is not a citizen?
Here's the bottom line. When it comes to slavery, in the fact that some slaves were auctioned, some slaves may have been kidnapped, or a lot of folks even voluntarily wanted to go over to other plantations and so on and so forth. And so the logistics in the ways in which slaves were being moved about, it seems that you're camping out on this notion that the slaves were stolen and that they were brutally sold in the marketplace through the auction block. And that's just not the case. That's not historically accurate. That's in fact ahistorical. Of course, anytime we talk about slavery or we learn about slavery in our public schools, you see, of course, the poor old slave sitting up there with chains on. He's sitting up on an auction block, and you have a bunch of white men standing around him. So that's kind of what people think of when they think of slavery. And so again, for me,
and I apologize for jumping in here, but I'm jumping in because I think that you're being put in an unfair, that there'll be clips coming out of this that like you're out here defending slavery. And I think it's an unfair to MLK 1960s, but we got to go back to the 1700s to really understand him and frame him up against, because we're having a conversation about slavery and not MLK. And I'm going to be humble enough to say,
good catch.
It's like when I hear you talk about this citizens deal, it's like the first time I heard Royce White talk about usury and the Federal Reserve being this detriment to the United States. And it's like, man, I'm gonna have to do some research on that, because I really don't understand what he's saying, or I'm not familiar. It's a new way of
Yeah.
framing the conversation.
Well, put simply, like
But hold on for a second, because I want to stop the slavery debate, because
Right.
I think it just, people are like, well, this man's defending slavery, and
It's gonna come out for
that's
sure.
all they're going to hear.
Right.
And we're here to have a conversation about MLK. And I think this framing of it.
Y'all know I'm not a Jason Whitlock fan, but I gotta give him credit for that. I gotta give him a hat tip for that. I'm gonna send him a baseball. I'm gonna send him a hat, because I do think, I don't know how they got on this discussion and why it's gotten so long, but shout out to Jason Whitlock for getting them back on track. I agree 100%.
Is, and again, I'm doing this one, I want people to come at me.
Right.
And everybody can have a problem with me, and Whitlock's choosing sides, and Chad is on the ropes, and I'm stopping him from getting beat up. And to some degree I am, because I know how people interpret things. It's like, I'm telling you, and this is humility. Royce White used to talk over my head, and it took me a long time to catch up. And a lot of you are so well researched, and I think some things you're talking about are certainly over my head. And I think some of the audience, all they're going to hear is, man, this man's up here trying to defend slavery.
Yeah.
And that's not what you're trying to do. So I'm going to move us to the next topic.
I like it. Good job.
And ask, is it fair to consider MLK Jr. a Christian heretic? Chad, you go first.
Well, absolutely it is. I mean, again, King wrote that he rejected the deity of Christ. He rejected the resurrection of Christ. He rejected the virgin birth. He rejected the literal existence of hell. I mean, these are all things that he wrote about in his papers. He said that he shocked this Sunday school class at the age of 13 or 12, rather, whenever he denied the resurrection of Jesus. And it was interesting because his father was a pastor. In his unpublished memoir, Daddy King, they called him, wrote that he was a proponent of the social gospel. So admittedly, I haven't heard a whole lot of sermons from Daddy King, but I do know about some of his involvements in some of the circles that he rolled in, and some of the things that he would do when King was born and during King's childhood. And so it makes sense then why King would end up going off to Morehouse University, or Morehouse College, and then Crozer Theological Seminary, where he said, where he wrote that this is something that I can get behind in terms of this gospel. He said, I rejected the fundamental gospel, but the social gospel is something that I can actually get behind. So he rejected what the Bible actually says about who Christ is, how Christ was born, what Christ came to do, the fact that Christ himself is the Son of God. He rejected all of that, but he accepted what Walter Rauschenbusch and what these other Marxist and leftist theologians had to say about the gospel. And it is that gospel that he said that he would actually preach to the world. And so it wasn't a thing where, King he just didn't know any better. He never heard the gospel. He never was exposed to the truth about Christ. And he only had a liberal interpretation of what the gospel is. That's not the case at all. He outright says that he rejected it. And so for this reason, he knew what heresy was, and he took on the preaching and the teaching of something that is not what the gospel actually is and what the Bible actually teaches. So yes, for that reason, I think King is 100% a heretic. Not only that, he said shortly before going over to receive the Nobel Peace Prize, that he believes that God actually shows himself in all the world religions, that God doesn't just exist in Christianity, he exists in all the world religions. That's that's a Sunday school heretical claim, because it goes against the very first commandment, that I am the Lord your God, that you shall have no other God besides me. And so this notion that he exists in all the other world religions is just complete heretical. So.
Delano, is it fair to call MLK Jr. a Christian heretic?
if the positions on Christian doctrine that I've seen from Dr. King, and Chad articulated them, so I won't repeat because he hit all the ones that I would hit. If those positions are not ones that he repented of and embrace biblical theology, I think it's more than fair to call him a Christian heretic.
There we go.
Those are not things where there are sort of slight differences in theology, right? The Baptists say,
Come on.
you know, we baptize on profession of belief. The Presbyterians say we baptize babies. Okay,
Hey,
some
shout out to
differences there. Some
Presbys.
people debate whether women can be deacons or not, so on and so forth. But if you deny the bodily resurrection, then your faith is in trouble. So again, is it possible that Dr. King turned from those ways and began to embrace more biblical theology? Certainly it's possible. I don't know what was in the man's heart or in his mind or came out of his mouth in his last days. FBI might. I don't. But absent some genuine professional faith, I think that's a more than fair characterization.
If deathbed, last days, blah, blah, blah. But as a minister, and you've gone out and preached the gospel everywhere, as a heretic, if he did have some deathbed, conversion, he was still a Christian heretic while he was out ministering. He didn't share he didn't accept the resurrection and things like that with the public. So, I mean, he's just a Christian heretic, no?
Well, I mean, when I think of using a word like heretic or heresy,
We already answered it though.
If a preacher, I mean, that's a sin, right? To say things about God that are not true, to say things about God that the Bible doesn't say is a sin. If a person repents of that sin, then they would be in right standing with God. That doesn't mean lessen the damage of their previous teachings, right? And I would argue that the teachings, and Chad has made this point, were largely around social issues, less around biblical theology. But some of those social issues are positive.
Biblical theology was trash.
In the
though.
book that I wrote, in my forthcoming book, I quote King, where he's talking about how the family is the most important institution in the country, and the fact that, I'm paraphrasing, but this is what he was saying, the fact that American families are beginning to fall apart is bad for the civilization. That's a beneficial message. And I think, particularly living in this cultural or social context where people are expecting their pastors not just to speak to.
But okay, fine. That's a cultural benefit. It's a benefit to society, but that's not a Christian argument. It's not a remotely Christian argument. So just because King believed in family, okay, fine. But what did he believe about Christ and who Christ is? That's the problem of the day. And I don't think that we, just because he said something good one time, and I'm not saying it, I don't think anybody's ever said that King never said anything good or never said anything that was consistent or helpful or beneficial. Nobody said that. So I don't know, Delano. That one, you might not get that one.
Social issues, but oftentimes to become explicitly political. And this is a bipartisan charge on both the progressive left and the conservative right. So this notion that, the only things we want to hear about when we go to church is Jesus is not something that, certainly not the people who live today, actually stand by. So
that's the problem though. If we go to church and we don't, y'all know that if you follow me in my book discussion, I just finished up my book, Preaching to the Choir. And I told y'all, this is a fantastic book, but the notion of this author is that Christians need to hear the gospel all the time. You never outgrow the gospel. My pastor, we did a pastoral installment last night in the evening service. And Danny got up and preached about why we need the gospel. He's preaching the gospel to our presbytery. We need the gospel on a regular basis. We don't need biblical CNN. We don't need sanctified MSNBC. We need to hear what thus saith the Lord all the time. Because I'll hear all that other stuff now. I hear when I go to the Jay Witt podcast, he's going to talk about politics and social and political commentary from a Christian male perspective. I'm going to hear that. But when I go to church, I need to hear something different. I don't want to hear what Jason, I don't want to hear surface stuff. I need to hear what God is saying. And I don't think Delano's a bad guy at all. I think he's a really good guy. I just think he's missing this part. And I think they really should have stayed here the whole time. Okay, we're done.
Yes, to your question, would the damage be done? Yes. But do I think that God would accept genuine repentance from someone who formerly was a false teacher? Of course. Paul was a persecutor of the church and gave the green light for people to be stoned in Jesus' name. And God used him to write a good bulk of the New Testament and the majority of the epistles. So I don't think Dr. King, he's not above the law, but he's certainly not below it either.
I'll
think anybody
start
said
with
that, though.
Chad, which I already think I know the answer to, and so it'll probably be point. But if, let's say, Dr. King was a preacher for 20 years, and he was a heretic for 19 years and 11 months and 20 days.
He's so silly, Jason.
Does that eliminate him from being a force for good?
Well, I mean, the fact of the matter is,
real quick. No. You can still hear the gospel on a regular basis and the whole counsel of God. The problem is a lot of the time we give the counsel of man and no gospel. But please keep in mind, and if you want to, Phantom, I don't think we're in disagreement. If we had a conversation, I don't believe that we would disagree about what I said and my position on that. But let me go back to this. I think Jason Whitlock proposed a really interesting concept. He preached for 20 years and you're a heretic for 19 years, 11 months, and so many days. Okay, I got you. The problem is, what is the gospel that you're preaching? Because otherwise, those people, yes, you're a heretic for that time period, but also the people that have sat under your preaching have not gotten the full counsel of God. They haven't gotten the gospel. They got a rejected Christ, a non-deified Christ. That's kind of crazy. That's kind of crazy work. But let's keep it going. See, yeah, I know, Phantom. I knew it. I know it. Okay, let's keep it dancing. Let's go.
in the grand scheme of things, yes, because you have to look at the body of work and you have to look at the effects and the impacts of that body of work on culture and on society. And you have to look at that and use that as a kind of and use a objective gauge to determine, you know, whether it was a net positive or a net negative. And the reality of it is the state of Black culture, which, you know, isn't completely in the dumps. But when you look at just the kind of morale of Black culture post the civil rights industry, compared to after or pre the civil rights industry, it's just a night and day difference. And I say this all the time, that King, through his rhetoric, took Black culture from a trying people to a crying people. And it wasn't just him, it was, you know, James Baldwin. It was that whole contingent who, through their writ, through their rhetoric, through their oratory, really kind of taught Black people the art of complaining, and how there's political power in complaining. There's political power and really kind of using those grievances for some kind of advantage. And what the civil rights movement and what the civil rights acts have done in effect is it made Black Americans a kind of protected class. And this has not been to our benefit. And so in a real sense, when you look at the important work that Delano is doing through writing about the family and writing about the importance of fatherhood and writing about these things, and there's also this kind of counterproductive thing that goes on the more that we promote someone like a King. Because the fact of the matter is, when you look at the way that Black men operated in those days, I mean, this is my grandfathers were like this, my great-grandfathers were like this. They were quintessentially men. They didn't complain. They didn't beg, and they weren't concerned about political legislation to make their way in life, right? These are men who worked in rural Arkansas and rural Oklahoma. These are guys who did what they needed to do to put bread on their table. They weren't concerned about some activists marching for them. And so the reality of it is, I mean, for me, I was given a speech one time, and I was asked about the legacy of Martin Luther King and whether the legacy is worth preserving. My answer was, I don't believe that the legacy of King is worth preserving. For me, I believe that my father's legacy is worth preserving, and his father's legacy is worth preserving. That's the legacy I'm concerned about, because it is through those means that I'm able to see, oh, I have the means and I have the wherewithal to cast down my bucket where I am, to be the man that I'm called to be, to provide for myself and to provide for my family. What maintaining the legacy of King does is this kind of government lobbying, this kind of picketing and protesting, and we need to pass the legislation.
Crown Act. We need a hair.
We need a Crown Act.
Hair protection.
And I'll end by saying this: when you look at, and I said this before when I went on your show, Jason, but when you look at the way that manhood was being taught, and I grant what Delano said earlier about the rare occasions where King would say something that makes sense about the family being one of the most important institutions in America. But there were also things that King would say that were counterproductive, that completely was mutually exclusive. For example, Joseph H. Jackson would say that it's on men to be men. He said, God has carefully made you and fixed you just right. And a lot of people in society are trying to change it. He says, no, if you need to be a man. He said, if you're not going to be a man, then braid your hair and start wearing step-ins. We need to be men. It's incumbent upon us to be men, irrespective of circumstances, irrespective of what we think is fair or not fair. We're not to covet or envy our neighbor's stuff. Focus on what you can do to be a man. And this is what Joseph H. Jackson and the NBC were doing. But King would say in an NBC interview,
National Baptist
Convention.
Yeah.
That's what the National Baptist Convention was doing. But
People
King
thinking
would,
of the TV network,
yeah, but
right?
King would go on the NBC, the broadcasting network, and say, well, we can't be men because of conditions, because of housing, because of X, because of Y, because of Z. People can look this 1967 interview up right now. And so you have these two completely different views on what it takes to be a man. One person, Jackson, is saying that you can use the means that you have within yourself and around you, poor resources. You have what it takes to be a man. Whereas King would say, we can't be men. We want to be men, but we can't be men because of our conditions. We have to change these conditions. And after having changed these conditions, then we can be men. And that's a sad and, dare I say, pathetic kind of walk or pursuit of life or way of trajecting through life. And so yeah, I don't really think that the legacy is worth preserving.
Can you be a heretic for a sustained time and be a net positive?
It's on God, though.
I know. I want you to
It's on
respond to
God
that, and then I'm gonna let you respond to that.
Okay. You said, can you be a heretic for a sustained
2 decades? Let's say that and be a net positive.
I believe so. I mean, I think this is an example, right? Again, if Dr. King's primary cultural output was his theology, was his biblical theology, then that would be one thing, right? If Black folks said, man, I love Dr. King because now I don't really have to believe that Jesus rose from the dead. I could just live my life any way that I want. And as long as I'm a good person because I love my neighbor, my white neighbor or my Black neighbor, then I'm good, then that would be one thing. But that's not his primary social output. That's not what he's primarily known for. He's not known as a biblical theologian. He's known as a person who rooted his arguments about social change in sort of biblical principles about personhood.
See,
that we are
biblical
all
principles is
created in
problematic.
God's image and that no man should be treated differently from another man just because of his skin color. So he was arguing against ethnic partiality, which was
right,
sort of the cause of the day, whether by policy and legislation or by social custom. Right, there's some neighborhoods you couldn't move into because they had restrictive covenants. They could not sell to a Black person, and I think he was arguing against that. So do I think any Black person who enjoys the right to vote, being able to stay whatever hotel or motel or Airbnb that they want to,
not Airbnb,
being able to sit where they want to in public accommodations, or being able to marry who they want to, I believe has a debt of gratitude to that generation. And I don't think that they have to buy into or accept his theology in order to do that.
Go ahead and answer.
So I'm not gonna go all the way back, but one of the things that's interesting about what Chad is saying in terms of being men is that Chad brought up for the first time, I believe, this issue of citizenship. But one of the rights of citizens in this country is to air your grievances and to air them to the people who you elect to represent you. So there's nothing unmanly about Black folks saying, we want to air our grievances. And those grievances for my mother-in-law was born in Mississippi. She's I ain't gonna say how old she is, but she's over 80. She was born in Mississippi,
Shout out to her.
raised in Louisiana. And my wife says her mom talks about what it was like when segregation was ended and how she still wasn't comfortable going and sitting in certain places just because like that was not what was done in terms of social custom. So again, this notion that there's something unmanly or infantile about airing your grievances either against your fellow man or against the state and appealing to a higher government authority or a different government authority is one that doesn't square with sort of American history. That's part of what we do. We air our grievances. And I'll say this, not for shock value, but one of the things, Jason, I know you took some heat for, but I think you were strong in your convictions. You said, look, man, them January 6 people, I respect them because they had grievances against the government and they not because they went and shot anybody, but they took their grievances to the people who were aggrieving them. Everybody else gets to do that, except black folk. So when black folk do it, then it's, oh, you're not being manly. You're not standing on your own 2 feet.
Hold on now.
Okay.
People January 6th did some major time in prison. So
Okay.
again, they face some real pushback.
No.
I got it. But
I'm not talking about the legal consequences. Here, just understand my point before.
That's major pushback. They've been demonized.
No.
They're considered the most racist people on the planet. If you were at January 6th, it's hard to get a job. We air our grievances. We throw bricks, burn cities down, and people get on TV and say, hey, we're doing a fundraiser to make sure we get bail.
I'm not talking about any of that. I'm talking about, I've listened to Chad characterize King organizing, whether it's young people or adults. I've heard the characterization of the civil rights, the mainstream civil rights movement. I've heard the people who came from the north, down south, outside agitators. I've heard them described as violent, not because they've committed acts of violence, it's because they agitated and then the white police officers used violence to suppress.
So real quick, I'm gonna jump in because I want to answer this. I want to build off of what Shelby just said. We aren't calling any of our heroes to be perfect while still holding them to the biblical standards. That's the point. I really think this is the whole thing. Like, did God use Martin Luther King Jr.? I think that should have been the first question and probably the last question. Did God use him? Yes. Is God glorified and honored? Yes. There you go. Lights off. End of the debate. There isn't a debate. The problem is we're trying to elevate. I don't think not intentionally. We cannot sit with the idea that MLK was just like a man like us. The best man is a man at best, no matter what. No matter how great and splendiferous and wonderful he or she is, they're still sinners in the hands of a mighty and powerful, loving and gracious, kind God who will put up with us and use us for his glory, that we might receive reward in heaven for being used by the King. You can't beat that with a bat. So I think that's really in my opinion, the issue is that we really don't want to say King was just a dude like me. He's just a dude like me. He's just a dude like you. If you're a dude, of course. I mean, you know what I'm saying? Like, is he flawed? Yeah. Was he messed up? Absolutely. Was he more messed up than everybody? I don't know. But he was messed up. I know that for a fact because he's a sinner, just like me. Sinners die. So there's our good proof and evidence that he was just a good for nothing low down, just like me. That's it. Okay, let's finish this up. Shout out to.
That's what I'm saying.
That's akin to, using a child as a human shield, quite frankly. And then so here's the reality. I mean, you brought up the lunch counters, you brought up the grievances and connected that to citizenship and so on. Here's the thing, Delano. Blacks weren't clamoring and chomping at the bit to eat a white cheeseburger in those days.
Facts.
This idea that blacks were just, beating down the door of the white school because they wanted to go to school with white children because they believe that they can learn better if they were sitting next to a white child, or that black man wanted to go and sit on the toilet next to a white man, or that, this is silly. It's just silly. This isn't the reality.
And you're saying that based on
the fact that, so you said earlier,
I would say this, I'm basing it off my parents.
And what I'm saying, you can find black folk whose parents will say something completely opposite. So we could agree that there was a diversity of opinions about the state of play in America vis-a-vis race from the 1940s through the 1960s. I'm going to stipulate to that point.
as I was saying. So again, blacks weren't trying to beat down the door to get into white spaces. To the extent that this became an issue, it was an exploitative thing. And so you say that, oh, we have a right to air grievances. I agree with you. But again, you keep conveniently taking out of the equation the way that the communists work, the way that Marxism moves, and how it does. I mean, you can look at the work that the Frankfurt School were doing when they came over here to the United States, and they were grafted into Columbia University, and they were really kind of focusing on cultural Marxism and how to exploit grievances. I mean, you can look at all of this and see that when it comes to anything that they can look at and use as a means of sowing discord, it doesn't matter whether those things are already being worked out. My older aunts and uncles in rural Arkansas, some of them went to school with white folks and others didn't. My dad comes from 13 brothers and sisters. Some of them chose, like, I want to go to that school because they have a good football team, even before integration. And they were allowed to because, again, depending on the local the local town in those days, you had some school districts who really enforced segregation laws, and you had others who didn't enforce it. I mean, it's similar to, for example, in 2020 during the mask mandates. You know what I mean? You had some cities and towns who had very strict mask mandates. I know in Dallas, Judge Clay Jenkins, he threatened every business owner with a fine if they allowed patrons to come in without wearing a mask. There were a lot of businesses that defied those rules and defied those regulations. The same thing was happening in those days. I'm not saying that those laws are right. Again, I said earlier in the debate that I'm not for forced segregation, nor am I for forced integration. And this is the reason why Bob Woodson, for example, left the civil rights movement.
That's not a reason, but continue.
Well, he said it in the 1980, I believe, 6 interview with David Hoffman. That's the thing that separated him from the civil rights movement is the distinction between forced integration and desegregation.
Right.
And so the reality of it is, when you take this idea that, well, we do have a right to air grievances as citizens, that's all that King was doing, that's a simple kind of easy and convenient excuse. But the reality of it is, it was far deeper than that. It was far more than that. Like, King wasn't just, well, let me do something about the fact that I can't eat a cheeseburger where I want to, or drink a cup of coffee where I want to. You still have to take into consideration freedom of association. And so I don't see coercing my neighbor to serve me a sandwich, even though he might not like black folks, as a win. I don't see that as a win. I'd rather know who the bigots are. I'd rather know who don't like me for the color of my skin, so I don't get my food, clandestinely spat on, or whatever the case may be. I'd rather know who these people are, rather than having people hide behind these laws and being coerced to do something at the threat of having lost their business or whatever the case may be, going to jail, just because I want to eat a hamburger at the hands of a white man. So
I mean, I think that is an oversimplification of the argument that I'm making. It wasn't just about, can I eat a white man's hamburger, right? If a hardworking mom, a domestic, goes into the local, the big box retailer, whatever it was at that time, right? And she wants to buy her daughter a Christmas present, and they're like, "No, we don't serve your kind here," or you have to choose from a different set of presents,
or you can't try on the clothes,
The idea that you're just whining and complaining because you're like, look, I'm a citizen here, right? My family goes back on this land 10 generations, and I'm being treated differently because of my race. And what I'm saying is, I don't think you can have a truly free society where we say we value liberty and we're setting up different modes of treatment for people based on race. That is a simple, so you're right. I haven't read all the books. I don't have all the history. I'm listening to the arguments that you and other civil rights era critical people are making. And I'm just asking whether we are holding this through line all consistently. So it's not just, oh, you don't have to eat the white man's hamburger, you're gonna make your own hamburger. I'm all for do for self. Do I think the civil rights movement ended up with some excesses that have been terribly detrimental to America and to Black America? Absolutely, I do. Absolutely, I do. Do I think that the Black community is in worse shape in some areas, particularly in the family, than we were in 1965? Absolutely, I do. But part of what comes with freedom is the freedom to fail. So you take the.
So I agree with Delano. I understand what he's saying, but I don't think you can overlook the benefit that there. Somebody mentioned it. You know, there were tons of businesses that were owned by Black people that were scuttled because of integration, forced integration. Because everybody now, like, oh, they got the better stuff, so we're gonna go over there. So imagine if they had been able to continue. Maybe, I mean, nowadays it seems kind of weird, like, oh, you're gonna start your own Google, you're gonna start your own Apple. That sounds crazy now. But what if they had been able to start at the same time? And they're already flourishing. There were tons of other businesses. So I don't think Delano is framing it correctly. I think is the word I want to use. I don't think he's right about that. But let's go.
Freedom. Somebody just said, look, we're getting rid of any race-based discrimination laws. Cool, I got the freedom. Now, let's use the family. And I don't want to be intentionally controversial here, but look, I don't want to leave Chad out there by saying controversial things. If Loving versus Virginia comes out, I think 1968.
Oh, that's
if after that,
low down.
85% of Black men chose to marry white women. Someone could ask the question, oh, was it wrong for Loving v. Virginia to be decided in that way? Or let me say it differently. Was it wrong to get rid of anti-miscegenation laws? And someone would say, based on the output, which is only 15% of Black men marry Black women, yes, it was wrong. And somebody else will say, no, Black men, when you get rid of anti-miscegenation laws, now you can actually have freedom of association. And if Black men choose to marry almost exclusively white women, that's a choice that they have to make. In the same way, if people misuse their freedom, that is a part of being a free people.
Ooh,
So
I don't know
there's
about
nothing
that.
inconsistent about that. There's nothing unmanly about that. You can both advocate for sort of manly, do for self ethos and say you can't have a free society where one group of people is constantly having their freedoms circumscribed because of their skin color. Those two things are not compatible. That's what I'm saying.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Delano.
So the fact is, it seems, with all due respect, that you're coming from a place of theory, because the reality of it is the rhetoric. I mean, you have to understand, when you look at somebody like King and James Baldwin and others, and how the media basically contorted themselves and bent over backwards to put these people front and center. And they said, these are the Negro leaders. This is how they would constantly introduce them: Negro leader, Negro writer, Negro poet, Negro, Negro. The reality of it is, to the extent, and this is why I brought up Nikki Giovanni earlier, because I think she said something key. My generation, we're not business people. We were protest people. We were civil rights people. As Bob Woodson put it, he said it was kind of like you walked outside and there was a storm and the rain started coming down and everybody was talking about the movement. It was really in with the youth, with the baby boomer youth in those days. And so it was something, Carol Swain, I interviewed her, and she said that she lived in rural Virginia and nobody ever talked about race. Everybody seemed to get along for the most part. But when she turned on the TV and she saw King giving a speech, it was just electrifying. And so the fact of the matter is, you have this thing happening, this trend, this movement. And what is the guy saying? He's talking about the Negro still not being free. He's talking about, we're coming to get our check. He's talking about et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. This caused what was really kind of a mindset shift. And you fast forward to today, and you see this kind of smug disposition that many Blacks have. This idea of seeing racism, this kind of race paranoia, or what the late Vodi Bakum called ethnic Gnosticism, this kind of seeing racism where there is no racism, this kind of, I'm sure you're familiar with the SCAR study that was done in the 1970s.
I think I've heard of it.
Right.
And we'll go ahead.
So just real quick. So basically, you can correct me if I'm wrong. They put a scar on several people's face and they sent them in for a job interview. But before they went into the interview, they said, well, let me fix it a little bit. But they actually erased the scar. So the person would go into the interview and they would feel that they were being judged and that they were that they didn't get the job because they had the scar, not realizing the scar was never there. And so it was really all in their head. And so I bring that up to say that, like, you know, sure, some people can say, well, that's what systemic racism has done. It has put us in the place where it made us, you know, feel inferior. But the reality is, how do you account for the fact that you saw this kind of upward mobility that we talked about earlier in the debate? How do you account for that? How did this kind of woe is me mentality skip generations, only to reawaken itself in these kind of young baby boomer militants and activists and people who are trying to, you know, Carol Swain said that she wasn't able to be a part of the movement because she was in rural Virginia. But she said, had she lived in Chicago or one of these other places, she said she would have been all in on the movement. So there's this electrifying thing that's happening by way of this trend that's being really pushed along by the press. They're making King a larger than life figure. He's on the cover of Life magazine, Time magazine, Nobel laureate. He's getting all of these accolades, all this attention. And the message is that of bitterness. It's that of grievance. It's that of woe is me. It's that is we need to get our check. It's that is et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. This caused what I believe to be this kind of downward trajectory that we would see, that would manifest into what we like. This idea of being a protected class has not benefited us well, is the point that I'm making here.
And I apologize, we're not going to get to the fifth question. We're 2.5 hours in. I think it's been great. And I apologize for the parts that weren't great. They were on me. But I want to summarize it and give these guys will have the final word. I want to summarize it by saying what I think my takeaway from this debate discussion is that Chad is arguing kind of what I believe, that the civil rights movement is exactly what we experienced with the Black Lives Matter movement. That Black people en masse were sitting at home having conversation. If you lived in the inner city, man, Pookie and them shot up so-and-so.
Not Pookie and them.
These gangs in our neighborhood are causing it to be unsafe. And then on TV, there's this conversation about the police are killing everybody. And I can't go outside because the police may kill me. And then we build a movement, Black Lives Matter, around the police killing everybody, when the reality was our neighborhoods are unsafe, they're controlled by gangs. And 30, 40 years from now, historians will be having discussions about how rampant this whole 2020s and 2010s were. The police were just killing everybody. And Black people were demanding that something be done about it. And it was really the media that decided, and the people that control the media decide, no, we're going to focus on this, rile everybody up about this. And so it's just, you know, history just keeps repeating itself because we haven't learned from our history. We haven't learned the tricks. And all of this diversity, equity, inclusion, intersectionality, everything race focused, Black, blah, blah, blah. It's just a problem. And we spend way too much time not evaluating things from a biblical lens. We evaluate everything through a secular lens, and that leads to a lot of the problems we have. That's my final thought. I'm going to give Chad his final thought, and then Delano his final thought, and we will end. I'm going to give these guys, and I know I didn't even prepare either one of these guys for this, but summarize your final thoughts in 3 minutes. I think that's about how much time I just used there. Put 3 minutes on the clock for Chad. This is unscripted, unprepared. Hadn't had time to think about it, but just your final bowl on this conversation and what you hope people take away. And then Delano will close us out. He'll get 3 minutes, and then show will stop.
Yeah. So I guess thank you, Delano, for this conversation, and thank you, Jason, for hosting it. my final thoughts are that when we look at the civil rights movement, when we look at Martin Luther King and his body of work, we can't take out of consideration the fact that we were in a Cold War period in our history. And we also can't take out of the consideration the fact that the communists moved in a very covert, in a very clandestine way. And we do have the information, we do have the records that what the communists were doing, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference in King was very much a part of that, as the records reveal. Again, anybody can go and look at the 2025 MLK files, which were recently released. Anybody can read Ben Kamen's book, Dangerous Friendship. Anybody can read the book Hammer and Hoe by Robin Kelly. All of these are materials that are at our disposal. And so we can't dismiss the reality that this was a Marxist movement by saying, oh, well, King never said that he was a communist. Or we can't say, well, everybody has a right to share a grievance. We can't be so credulous and so gullible to dismiss this very jarring thing that has worked to the detriment of not only Black America, but America at large and Western civilization. We can't ignore the glaring facts because it doesn't meet the kind of sensibilities that we have or that we've been conditioned to have as it relates to King. I mean, we've all been trained to believe that he's this great leader. We've all been trained to believe that if not for King, we wouldn't have rights in America. That's totally not the case. I know that me personally, I owe nothing to King. Again, I want to maintain my dad's legacy. I want to maintain my grandparents' legacy. That's the legacy that I want to maintain, and that's the legacy that you should maintain in terms of your folks, especially if your folks were people who are worth emulating. And if they're not, and even if they are, we're to look to the scriptures. We're to look to what the Bible says about what manhood is and what womanhood is, and we're to basically repent and to pursue what saith the Lord in terms of the kind of people we ought to be. Don't follow or worship King, because if you do, not only are we giving our country away, but we're also giving the church away, and that's
wow,
that's quite terrifying.
Delano, floor is yours.
Well, I want to echo Chad's sentiment. Jason, I thank you for convening this conversation. Chad, I thank you for the back and forth, the dialogue. Again, I respect your work. I just fundamentally disagree with some of the conclusions, right? I've stated some of my issues. I think there's been at times intellectual inconsistency. And in fact, if I had to characterize it, I think some of the same things that you talk about in what I would call your 1964 project mirror some of the things that Nicole Hannah-Jones was talking about in the 1619 project. Not the same issue, but some of the same tactics. She sees racism everywhere. You see Marxism everywhere. She believes the founders need to be torn down because their moral failings and inconsistencies have marked and poisoned sort of the evolution of American history since the American founding. And what I hear Chad saying is that the moral inconsistencies and moral failings of King and his generation have done the same thing to Black America since that time. But what's interesting is that the Civil Rights Act of 1964 is what any citizen, and the Supreme Court recently ruled this in a 9-0 ruling, that the Civil Rights Act applies just as much to majority groups as it does minority groups. So when a white person feels that they've been aggrieved at work and have been discriminated against based on race, they make an appeal to the governing authorities based on that act. So whether that's a DEI policy or some other policy that they believe is discriminatory in nature, they can say, hey, you can't treat me differently because of my race. And what I'm saying is I think that's consistent. Their application of that is consistent with what King was arguing for in the 1960s. But I think ultimately what this comes down to for me, and one of the things that, one of the reasons why I push back on some of the things that Chad says is because I'm a person that believes in gratitude. And Chad said he owes nothing to Dr. King. That's certainly his perspective. And I respect any man who sees his dad as a hero more than any ball player or politician or civil rights leader. But again, if you're the type of person who wants to live in certain neighborhoods and go to school in certain places and marry certain people, then you owe a debt of gratitude to the people who came before you. And I think if there's one thing that our politics needs less of, it's ingratitude. Every victimhood and bitterness is the order of the day, and it's no more righteous coming from the right than it is from the left. I'm going to end with this quote. This is from A Few Good Men. This is I'm quoting Jack Nicholson's character, Colonel Jessup, when he says, when he was talking to Tom Cruise about, you know, getting the truth, and he said, "I have neither the time nor the inclination to explain myself to a man who rises and sleeps under the blanket of the very freedom that I provide and then questions the manner in which I provide it. I would rather that you just said thank you and went on your way." And that is the way I feel when I hear people, anybody basically under the age of 40, casting moral aspersions on the civil rights movement and saying what they would have done if they were in their position. We should just say thank you and go on our way.
I'll never thank anybody for pushing communism ever. So
shout out
That's
to
your
Chad.
argument, and you're free to hold it.
Chad is a gangster.
You said we were done.
You did say that.
You said we were done.
We'll see you next time. Thank you.
All right. So that was Jason Whitlock. Look, I give Jason Whitlock a lot of problems because I think he's definitely flip-flops on a lot of things. I thought that was a really good interview, a really good debate between those two. Yeah, I thought it was civil. Even if you didn't get to every topic, I'm going to drop the link just in case you didn't get it. If you didn't get the link to it, go check it out and go support them for sure. I think this is definitely worth supporting. But thank y'all so much for that. I really appreciate it. Shout out to Chad. He's a friend of the channel, great content creator. Shout out to Delano. I don't think Delano's a bad dude. I can rock with Delano. So shout out to him as well. And shout out to y'all. Thank y'all so much for hanging with us. It's been a long evening, man. We started out early looking at this debate, and we tipped our toe in there and listened to what Candace was talking about. Pure foolishness. And then we jumped back in and finished up the debate between Delano and Chad. So shout out to you all. Thank you so much. I'm gonna real quick. I think Cinema Shogun did his Cinema Shogun. If you're not following on X, you need to follow Cinema Shogun. He does a review of Candace. He does like a play-by-play, like the old school Cliff Notes. It's outstanding. And yep, he has it ready. I'm gonna drop it in the chat for y'all. Check him out, man. He does a great job. It's simple, man. It's real simple. Like every 5 minutes, he just gives an update on it and then corrals it all together. Great job. I'm gonna tell y'all right now. Tomorrow, we're not gonna do Candace tomorrow. We ain't gonna do it. I'm gonna probably transition and just do a Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and I'm gonna play it by ear. But at the moment, like today was a total waste. Like what? She just threw stuff out there that didn't make any sense. I don't want to waste y'all's time. We can do body cam footage. We can do another interview. We can do a debate like what we watched right here. There's no reason to ruin your night watching this dumb stuff. Because again, I don't think anything's going to come out of it. And it's just stupid. So I'm going to play it by ear, but I don't think we're going to do it tomorrow. We'll probably just do it Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. But I'll let you know ahead of time. You'll know, but ahead of time. But shout out again. Shout out to Cinema Shogun. Thank you so much. Everybody, thank you. I really appreciate y'all rocking with us. I appreciate y'all hanging in. I really do appreciate it. Hopefully you all have a great night. Have a beautiful rest of your evening. Have a great day tomorrow. Go out there and do wonderful things for God's glory and for his honor. I really appreciate y'all. Thank you to everybody. Thank you to the moderators. You all really keep this thing moving in the right direction. And I really do appreciate each and every one of y'all. Y'all mean a lot. Thank you so much. Thank you to the super chats. Thank you to the members. Thank you to people who have liked this video. If you didn't like it, just hit the button 3 times. I mean, hit it in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Thank you to new subscribers. I really appreciate y'all as well. I'm still trekking along pretty steady to hit my goal of 100,000 by the end of April. Let's go ahead and do it sooner than that. So everybody, thank y'all so much. I'll see you all real soon. Grace and peace. Thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of the Jay Witt Podcast. If you enjoyed today's show, please do me a favor and hit me up with that 3-piece special. Like the video, subscribe, and of course, share it with somebody who would also enjoy this type of content. And make sure you leave a comment because I do pin the best comments to the top. So thank you so much for tuning in today. And until next time, everybody, grace and peace.